because we're getting to the really exciting stuff this afternoon. Please, could I have my speakers here? And then I'll explain the methodology we can use. I just also want to mention, please, a few people have asked for the, knowing that we're webcasting, because I did not mention it this morning, and I'm terribly sorry. I should have, as a matter of protocol, told you all that this meeting, in common with our standard practice at ICTSD, is webcast both live and afterwards in a recorded version on our website. We have established through the last year that we've been doing this, that this significantly enhances our ability to reach and engage with important stakeholders around the globe. So by doing this and by allowing for people to engage with us, we can enrich discussions. So if you want to see this or you want to link it to your own websites, please feel free. It's on our website, ictsd.org. Valentina, if I've done anything wrong, come and tell me. Okay, thank you. Now, the methodology for this afternoon is this. This is where we get to the crunch space of this meeting. We want to talk about specific sectors, what they mean in your economies, and what the challenges are. So, as we mentioned this morning, we have worked with these good people here to produce 4 very brief country studies which have surveyed sectors in each of the countries concerned. You have all had those studies, so you've had plenty of time to read them and digest them. Now we're going to take the sectoral approach, because the objective of this meeting is to find out and understand which are the important sectors for this region and what are the key challenges, especially policy challenges, investment challenges, I don't know, sustainable development challenges, whatever, around those sectors so that we can work to develop the means to try to overcome those challenges and allow us to use these sectors to leapfrog. So what we're going to have now is, okay, here's the methodology, guys. Are you all ready? Okay, John is going to spend 5 minutes, no more than 5 minutes, talking about tourism from the Rwandan paper. Right. Then each of the others are going to spend 2 minutes talking about tourism in their country papers. That will enable us then to have another 15 minutes for anybody in this room who is concerned with that sector to engage, to talk about the importance, the challenges, the policy issues, etc. We will then do that for the logistics sector, for the, what have I written here? I do not know. Help me. Betty, what are you talking about? Which sector? Financial sector. Sorry, I don't recognize my own handwriting. And finally, the ICT sector. Those are the 4 sectors that have emerged as a common thread throughout all the country studies. So they, in the first line, are what we're going to look to analyze this afternoon. So first, John, take it away on tourism.
Good afternoon, everyone. As you heard, my name is John Bosco Kanyangoga. I'm from Rwanda. I'm going to present about the opportunities and challenges in the tourism sector, of course, from the Rwandan perspective. Before I begin my presentation, allow me to say this. I'm catching my flight at 16 hours, 15 minutes. So I leave the hotel at 2:30 today, this afternoon. And I want to thank ICTSD for accommodating my not so easy schedule, because I have a flight midnight from Kigali, so I have to go back to Kigali this afternoon. I'm sorry about that. Yeah. Very quickly, the first slide shows the general importance of services sector in Rwanda, where Rwanda has Vision 2020 and has earmarked the services sector as very key in regard to building a service or a knowledge-based economy. And the service sector is currently contributing to 45% to our GDP. If you compare that with the second, which is agriculture, that is at 33%. The other important sector is industry, which is at 14%. So you can see the services sector is very important for the Rwandan economy. When it comes to taxes, it contributes about 70%. Again, it's very important for tax purposes. And in terms of growth, it is expected to remain at the average of 14% in the next 5 years. It is also very key in job creation, where it has been identified as the key or the most major job creator in Rwanda. And as a matter of fact, it's the largest provider of formal employment. The services employment growth is at 16% per 2014 data that we have, which grew from 9% the previous year. And of course, the government has witnessed this potential, and so much is being done to develop the services sector, including creating a special platform which we've called the Rwanda Trade and Services Council to coordinate these efforts and enhance the potential of this sector. It is coordinated in one of the key developmental institutions that we have in Rwanda called the Rwanda Development Board. Now, very quickly, specifically on the tourism sector, tourism is very important for Rwanda. I know even in our neighboring countries it is very important, but for Rwanda, this is how important it is. You can see for the years 2013-2015, the tourism revenues were totaling to $292.5 million US. Now, for some economies, that may not sound significant, but for Rwanda, that is big. And as a matter of fact, tourism is the highest earner of foreign currency in Rwanda, followed by minerals, but tourism comes first. And the biggest subsector in terms of revenue earnings has been in the leisure subsector. We have been having a number of visitors coming to as tourists, especially those who are visiting friends and relatives. Tourism remains the largest foreign exchange earner in Rwanda, like we said, and the sector is currently employing an estimated number of 34,000. And of course, indirectly, supporting other jobs that total to almost 74,000. And of course, more related investments are coming to boost the potential, and the outlook shows that those numbers will be going higher rather than going low. What are the opportunities available for the tourism sector in Rwanda? The first one is an encouraging and friendly policy, legal and institutional framework to support the sector. There is a new tourism bill that was passed recently and is geared towards enhancing the sector. Recently, we have put in place, or we have adopted a strategy to promote what we've called MICE, meetings, incentives, conferences, and exhibitions. It was launched recently, and the cabinet just adopted it, and we believe this is going to specifically enhance business tourism. And this comes at a time when the Convention Bureau also came in place and is operational since 2014. We believe that the MICE tourism will benefit to operators, hotels, restaurants, professional conference organizers, and event managers. So you can see how the spillover effects will impact and create many jobs and enhance many businesses. And then another opportunity is what we're benefiting through the East African Community Regional Integration Initiatives, where the 5 partner states have agreed to make it easier for the tourists when they are visiting our respective countries in the region. And one of the ways of enhancing that was the adoption of the East African tourism visa, or the single visa as we usually call it. And it was launched in January 2014, and Rwanda is one of the 3 countries in the EAC that have already started implementation, in addition to Uganda and Kenya. And that one has enhanced more opportunities in terms of sharing tourists who come to the region, and Rwanda gets its share. We have also developed new products that we didn't have previously. Namely, we have developed cultural tourism, which we are developing to showcase our cultural wealth. There's also bird watching in one of our forests. It's called the Nyungwe Forest, one of the biggest forests in Rwanda. And also one of the new products that we recently developed is what we've called the Musanze Caves, which have been open since 2013. Of course, with all these challenges, there are few, with all these opportunities, there are some challenges that we need to overcome. And of course, there are many, but to categorize them and make them a little bit few so that we can focus on them with energy and address them accordingly, I've highlighted a few. One is lack of viable financial sustainability, where the actors are saying the tourism sector is lacking enough appropriate and sustainable financial support system for them to go further. There's a challenge to access and operate in regional and international markets. At the EAC level, of course, we have removed some challenges, but there are still other challenges that are still there. We didn't have enough time to, I don't have enough time here to go into a number of details, but there are a few requirements that are still in there, especially for the business operators that are in the tourism sector, like setting shop, like requirements to do business and all that. Then in Rwanda, we've been having an issue of classification of hotel standards. Currently, hotels are being classified according to the East Africa standards. Now, this is an important step, but still there's a need to further advance it to international standards, specifically for our international visitors. And then, last but not least, we have a large-scale deficit, especially for the private sector. They're saying there's a need to address the issues related to the large-scale deficit in the area of guides, chefs, as well as service personnel and technicians for the hotels. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for your kind attention. I hope I didn't exceed the 5 minutes.
Fine, thank you. George, do you want to give us very briefly, in 2 minutes or less, is this consistent with your findings in Uganda, and what else do you perceive?
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you, John Bosco, for sparing me an extra minute to make my quick remarks. Of course, Rwanda and Uganda, despite being present in the same geographical location, our tourism industry would whereas to a certain extent similar to Rwanda, there are certain things that would be uniquely Ugandan. But just to use my 2 minutes, looking at what my stakeholders mentioned, engaging with them, the East African tourism visa that John has talked about, is it possible to to introduce new aspects in the East African tourism visa? For instance, about 4 months ago, Uganda doubled its visa entry fees. It used to be $50, then all of a sudden it became 100. Yes, people are sharing within that, but the players in the industry are saying, whereas we have agreed to share the tourists, can we also have a regime that says that you cannot wake up all of a sudden and increase the fees even when we are going to share in the increase? There are some other things that we can still add to the East African tourism visa. For instance, this region suffers to the same degree a negative travel advisory. But when there is a bomb exploding in Mogadishu and they say East Africa is not a safe place to come, we found out that up to 13 companies have closed in Uganda since the last bomb went off here in Nairobi. You remember the Westgate shopping mall that was attacked by Al-Shabaab. 13 companies have closed, up to 550 jobs have been lost. Now the numbers are several times here in Kenya. So can we have an early warning response mechanism to negative travel advisories built into the East African tourism visa, so that it just does not end into what has been presented to the Northern Corridor, but works better for business? That's one. Those are two issues. Now, the third issue is something that we have, because we all have the same, we've liberalized in this region tourism. We have been liberalizing since the Uruguay round was concluded in tourism. Kenya, Tanzania, including Uganda, we have WTO commitments to this effect. We have liberalized tourism as one of the 7 priority sectors in the ESC Common Market Protocol. Now, the question that the stakeholders were asking is that these schedules of commitments, do they provide are they going to deliver the common market that we intended? Don't we need to do something beyond the schedules? And so, looking at what the SADC region is developing, they've got what they call sectoral annexes. A sectoral annex is something that is more binding than the WTO's reference papers, like on basic telecommunications, to which Uganda is a signatory to. Now, a sectoral annex on tourism, agreed and negotiated by the partner states of the ESC, would add more value to the schedules that we presently have, so that for those things that we cannot achieve through the schedules that we now have, we could achieve through the annexes. Now, the beauty of the sectoral annex is that it's not the technocrats exclusively that would negotiate such a schedule, but the stakeholders, the regulators, the people who actually get to suffer the pinch when things don't work are the ones who negotiate the annex. Now, the beauty of it compared to the reference paper is that the reference paper only, it's only those signatories to the reference paper that have liability for it. But for the annex, when agreed by the partner states, would apply to all of them. And that way, an additional regional instrument would probably make us get closer to the common destination for ESC for tourism that would wish to achieve. Now, one other thing that I thought I would mention, I don't know if we shall have an opportunity to discuss regional value chains, but there's something very interesting on regional value chains for tourism. The best builders for safari tracks in this region are in Arusha. That corridor between Arusha and Moshi is where the best safari tracks are built. Now, the best tour vans are built here in Nairobi. What my stakeholders asked is that we have worked out an understanding between Kenya and Uganda where you import these 14-seater vans from Japan. They are in bond, they are brought to Nairobi, built into safari vans, and then imported into Uganda as safari vans, or tourist buses. However, for the trucks which can take you through the Mara and all these other places that the tourists want to go to, such an arrangement does not exist because between us and the Tanzanians. Now, if we can shift our experience, the precedent of Nairobi building these things when they're imported, they're transshipped through Nairobi, but you only get to pay your taxes after the van is complete. If we did the same thing for Tanzania, through that corridor, you bring the vans, you don't have to take them to Kampala first and then take them to Moshi, but you import them through Dar es Salaam, they go to Moshi, they are converted into safari trucks, and then you get to import them in Kampala as a safari truck, benefiting from all the incentives that come along with it. Now, when you are a small tour company, such as the lady I traveled with from Kampala, who is in this room, the turnaround period that you get if your Land Cruiser does not have to get to Kampala first and then go to Arusha, could be the difference between a successful business and one that collapses before the shipment actually takes place. Now, those aspects are some of those things that we can build into a sectoral annex as an additional instrument to deliver the common tourist destination that we wished for. I can lend the next minute my sister Tabitha on this side when she gets her 2 minutes. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, George. That was really interesting to look at some of these dimensions of a regional approach, and I think that's something we hope that this discussion will take over in a little while. Tabitha, it was given to you, so...
Yeah, thank you very much. I think tourism in Kenya has been more or less like the backbone of the economy apart from agriculture, and providing employment in the hotel industry, in game parks and all. And it's actually been a very dynamic sector, except what has been happening of late, the travel advisories, because of insecurity. And that one has actually impacted negatively, because if you look at the data, hotel occupancy has actually been going down, except for the last 1 year or so. It has picked up. And tourism is actually dependent on the political environment, because if you look at what happened in the post-election violence, that impacted negatively on the tourist sector. What was happening in the global financial crisis also impacted on Kenya, because if there is if it has impacted negatively on the people who are supposed to come to travel to Kenya, then of course it impacts us negatively. So what has been happening is also actually not very good, and Kenya has not taken advantage of domestic tourism. We have relied so much on the West as the source of tourists. But right now, I think there's some kind of initiative to look east. And apart from that, we are also encouraging people to indulge in domestic tourism, because that is an area that has actually not been tackled properly. Apart from that, we have also relied on very few products. For example, we have relied on animals, game parks. And we have not realized that that one is also impacting negatively on the environment, because we go to the same places, we rely on the beach, we rely on the game parks, the big five, that is the lion, the leopard and all. And then not forgetting that there are other tourist sites, other tourist products that have not been tackled. And of course, there are other challenges, because when it comes to employment, we've been relying on women as the entertainers. Now, looking at it from a gender point of view, there are actually gender impacts on the tourism sector. I don't want to go into that so much, but we've realized that we have actually not taken the social aspect of tourism into consideration, because we usually use our women more as trophies. We want to show them to sell our tourism sector. So those are some of the things that need to be looked into in the tourism sector, apart from looking at the product quality, making sure that we not only advertise ourselves abroad, but also locally. Thank you very much.
The Tanzanian perspective.
Thank you very much. The Tanzanian perspective reflects the Rwandan experience in terms of the importance and the high growth rate of the sector. At the moment, we are receiving, in 2014, we received 1.1 million visitors, and literally every tourist created a job, 1.2 million jobs. Out of those, 500,000 direct, the others indirect. It's contributing 18% to GDP, 30% to export earnings. And the big deal is that we are using only about 10% of the resources. Tanzania is ranked as the second in the world in terms of the quality of its tourist attractions. However, the downside is that we are 98th in global ranking in terms of quality of services and the business environment. So if we can notch that one up, we should be able to double, triple our number of visitors very, very quickly. And this points to where the challenges are. We have challenges in the policy framework. Unfortunately, it's a policy that is named high value, low volume. And by implication, it locks out also the small investors from the industry. And many of the jobs relate to those who are running small cottage hotels and things like that. Everybody thinks, in government thinks that's where to make money. the local government, sometimes even village governments, let alone the central government. The fees that we are charging for a license, what we call a Tala license, ranges between $1,000 and $5,000, whereas in the region it would be about $200, $150. And it does affect the investment that is going up. The biggest problem is that many of the visitors go to the northern circuit, Kilimanjaro, Serengeti, Manyara, and the Selous and the southern circuit, which has much more rich reservoir of wildlife, is hardly visited because of poor infrastructure. No airstrips, no roads. And so we also do have problems in conservation. The story is known. The other day they caught another container load of tusks going out through Malawi. If you look at the southern Tanzania, the Selous, there were about 110,000 elephants in 1975, mid-70s. Today, about 15,000, and nobody really knows. But the real medicine for this problem, we have tried the army, it didn't work. Other side stories, externalities killed it. But we see that where the tourism industry is well developed, also conservation takes place, because these things happen in the dark. They don't happen where you have a large number of visitors. So perhaps one way of saving the industry is spreading the development model, particularly to areas where people are scarce. We also have game ranching, but, well, it's again in the northern circuit and not in the southern circuit. We have seen, for instance, how game ranching can help to improve conservation, particularly in countries like South Africa. So that's where we stand. We recognize it's one of the priority sectors. Everybody recognizes that we have such wonderful natural gains. The solution has been a little bit slow in coming. But the other day, the private sector had a meeting. We have a session, what we call the Tanzania National Business Council, co-chaired by the president and the chair of the Private Sector Foundation. And they agreed that whatever we decide to take to what we call the Big Results Now program, where the real essence is monitoring on a day-to-day basis, on a weekly basis, and at very high level, presidential level, on a monthly basis, seems to be working in sectors where we have problems, and they have agreed that tourism sector should also go to that model of implementation. Big Results Now. We hope it will save it. Thank you.
Thank you, Betty. Well, I think it is clear from those 4 brief presentations that tourism is clearly, to everybody, seen as a very high potential sector with huge additional potential still to be exploited. Clearly, it's a very efficient job creator, and this is also an important factor. We've seen opportunities brought out throughout through all our presenters about thinking about new products, thinking about the quality of the products, the tourism products, and what we have on offer, understanding the value of the natural assets that this region owns that need to be safeguarded, and as Betty recommends, they can best be safeguarded through high levels of tourism. So that's an additional sort of incentive for growing the sector. It is clear also that we see that there may be some potential for regional cooperation, both in terms of regional marketing, but also in terms of, for example, through the sectoral annex, bringing efficiencies into the sector. But a number of challenges remain. John referred to the lack of financial support. We heard about a range of regulatory and policy challenges. We heard about the challenges of standards, the skills deficit, social concerns, the vulnerability to political environments, and again, George here presented a possible solution being for the early warning on the visa system. But clearly there are things that we need to take into account if we truly want to take advantage of this tremendous opportunity. So I'd really like to invite the various stakeholders in this room and anybody that's engaged with the sector to now make some comments or address some questions, please. Yeah.
Can I? Hello. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. My name is Felix Okach. I'm a director at Association for Professional Societies in East Africa. Sorry for coming in late, but at least I'll come in. Thanks for good presentations from Tabitha, George, John Bosco, my friend, and Lemo. Now, one thing in East Africa, which I'm asking, because it's come up in many meetings we go to, we are so interrelated that if we don't make policies which are harmonized, we seem to suffer. For example, I'll just give 2 examples. Take the way George has put it. When there was a bomb blast in Kenya, it affected tourism in Uganda, and I'm sure a bit of Tanzania. Now, in animals in East Africa, normally the wildebeest, when they're moving to Tanzania, tourists come to see where they're going across Serengeti. But in Tanzania, the regulations allows people with a license to kill the animals. Now, you see, when they live here in Kenya, it's illegal to kill any. But in Tanzania, I think we pay some fee for ranching, then you can shoot. Is there, if those things are harmonized, is there a way you can use this scenario to assist Africa? Because tourism is a potential in this region, income is so high, it's improving a lot our GDP, and the multiplier effect is big. What measures do you have in place to harmonize those facilities so that it's easier for East Africa? Thank you.
Thank you. I too join the other colleagues in thanking the presenters for those useful presentations. Now, I'm from the policy side because I work for government. And from my perspective, the areas that are critical for us to address are the areas of policies, laws, and the plans we have, and the regulations and guidelines we put in place. Now, in the case of Uganda, in the last 2 years, we have reviewed the wildlife policy, the tourism policy. We have put in place a 10-year master plan for tourism development and a 5-year sector development plan. And working together with our neighbors in Rwanda and DRC, this week we were signing the Greater Virunga Transboundary Cooperation Agreement, where we are looking at conserving the resources within that area where the mountain gorillas are, conserving them, and jointly managing that. It touches on what my brother from Kenya is saying. We have the Mountain Elgon Conservation Area. We're also collaborating with Kenya. I think these kind of initiatives will help us in not only conserving, but promoting the joint use of these resources that we share. The other area we are considering seriously is the area of regulations and guidelines. Without proper regulations and guidelines, it becomes difficult for us to develop these sectors to a level where we can then market them effectively. So in the last 2 years, we've been looking at regulations in the areas of classification of accommodations, like my colleague said there, using the East African standards, where that one's ongoing, regulations on registration and licensing of tour accommodations, tour packages, tour guides. These are very important areas which we need to harmonize. And as the EAC, when you talk about the annex to the protocol, with this one thing we think and we hope can be agreed upon in the near future, because we still have challenges of movement across our borders between Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, Tanzania, and yet we're trying to market East Africa as a one tourist destination. So much as we have one tourist single visa, but internally we still have some non-tariff barriers which we need to overcome. And I think this annex would go a long way in helping us overcome that challenge. But in terms of the gaps that we see, it's the same problem we have: infrastructure, skills development, high levels of taxation which affect the small operators. And as governments, I think we need to look at incentives that can help the private sector be able to develop, and then maybe tax them in future when they're establishments are more viable. We are looking at joint marketing of East Africa as a region as we go out, and it's important to address the challenges that we face as a region. We talked about the threats that we suffer as a region as a result of having an incident either in Kenya or Ebola in West Africa. We need to have a strategy where we can then, as an area, jointly do marketing, but also deal with these negative advisories which do come up from time to time. So, from my perspective, I think we need to do more studies to identify and analyze the capacities we have as countries, and what can we do to take advantage of these gifts we have to penetrate the external markets that we are all trying to enter. What can we do? We need things like quality improvement of our products for them to be able to be marketed effectively. What other things can we do to take advantage of the capacities we have as a countries and as a region? And if these gaps have been identified, how can we work together with you, partners, to find ways and means of overcoming those difficulties, so that then this tourism sector, which we have all identified as key in contributing to the socio-economic transformation of our countries, can be born. There's a lot that we can benefit from this, but if we do not overcome these challenges, then the opportunities that come from tourism development will not be realized in the region, and this is precisely what we want to do. Thank you.
Thank you for raising those questions. I should just sort of intromit a procedural note here, is that what we're trying to do in this session is precisely that, is sector by sector to look at the countries and then to raise some questions. What we'll be doing tomorrow afternoon, in the morning we'll look at some substantive areas again, but in the afternoon we'll break up into separate groups by sector for each group to determine a practical way forward for the next step in this project. So just to orient you to where we are. Have we got any more brief questions or challenges that anybody wants to put out? Yes, and then there.
Thank you very much. I am also from Uganda, and I would like to thank the ambassador and George, because they've more or less said most of what I really wanted to say. I want to focus on the challenges that we face as operators in Uganda. Let me note here that when I first joined the tourism industry about 13 years ago, the operation environment was quite different from what we have now. It's gradually improved, but I think we need a lot more to be done for us to have a much better business environment, for us to actually become profitable, and for the government eventually to get the taxes that they're looking for. As a country, Uganda, we call it the Pearl of Africa. It is very endowed. I think we are the most endowed country in the whole of East Africa. You just need to visit Uganda for you to believe what I'm telling you. Some of the challenges we face as an operator, we have a challenge with expensive finance. So we need to have, access to finance made easier, maybe through the East Africa Development Bank or something of that nature, but you need to make finance more accessible to the private sector for us to be able to grow and invest a lot more. I also look at what I call the social infrastructure, which makes it very difficult for us to operate and also makes our services quite expensive. And here I'm looking at things like much more improved roads, ICT in the lodges. I also run 2 lodges, and it's very expensive for us to operate the lodges. As a result, it makes our rooms expensive, and yet we are competing with Kenya and Tanzania, and people are always saying, but Uganda, the lodges are expensive. In Kenya, you can get a lodge at $80. In Uganda, you're looking at $200. But when you look at the cost of operating a lodge in Uganda, it is quite expensive. When you look at the cost of operating a safari, just like George has alluded to, the cost of getting a car customized to actually be able to do your safaris at the same level as Kenya and Tanzania is quite very costly. But we're also looking at the fact that domestically travel within Uganda in terms of flights, domestic flights, we only have one regular operator that is really consistent, and that is still quite very expensive, because a return flight to Bwindi, for example, is about $500, which is really very high and needs to be looked at. And that's about 45 minutes flight. So that's quite very expensive. Certainly ICT, it's very expensive, where some of us are not connected to the national grid for electricity, so we're generating electricity, and the cost of fuel, each time fuel goes up, it never comes down. So that, again, makes it very expensive for us to operate. So we need to look at how the social infrastructure can be improved all over the region. When you look at things like marketing, again, the ambassador has alluded to the fact that marketing, it becomes a challenge for us to market. It's quite expensive because we've got to go to these exhibitions. East Africa has now started marketing as East Africa, but they're limited to certain markets, World Travel Market, ITB, and maybe Indaba. What about the other markets where we still need to get other source markets where we need to get clients? So the whole environment needs to be improved, and in addition to what everybody else has said, I think I just wanted to re-emphasize those points.
A comment here too?
I think I'm kind of posing a challenge and raising a discussion more with George, but a challenge to everyone in policy and in government. And in East Africa, this relates to all of the East African countries, we exploit what God has given us. And yet, I mean, in terms of sceneries, in terms of animals, but yet we can add value to this stuff that God has given us, for it to be even more, to give a better tourist experience. Yeah, so I think of countries like Singapore, which doesn't have so much, which is not as endowed as Uganda. Kenya is more endowed, but yeah, or as Kenya. But they have higher numbers of tourism than we have. They earn a lot more than we do. And I think it's kind of the experience that they give to their tourists. So when tourists come, how do they connect from one center to the next center? What kind of souvenirs do they carry with them? You know, we've done curios for the longest time, but we still need to kind of improve on that packaging, probably even make some more usable items that people can buy. For example, clothing. You know, do people come here and, you know, go back home with big shopping bags like we do when we visit their countries? I think we have a lot more to exploit. We need to use what God has given us, but then build up on it and make a lot more money from it.
Thank you. You know that John and I were convinced you were going to say we're going to build Disneyland here.
Yes.
I need to give a quick word to John before he has to run. Then we'll take two more quick questions and then we have to move to the next sector.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just have two quick points to make as we continue discussions. But if you could allow me to also do some little marketing for Rwanda, because it's like everyone here. Now, Rwanda is the heart of Africa. So I don't know which one is better, the heart or the pearl. And secondly, Rwanda has the most beautiful people in the world. I didn't say girls, I said people. Okay. Two quick things. My friend Felix, supported by, I think, the ambassador from Uganda, they talked about the need to have harmonized policies across our region. And I think this is very good. And I would even add that after we have harmonized, we even continue further to consider common policies as we continue to deepen our regional integration, where we'll have like common policies that cut across the board and integrate and help everyone in the region. Then secondly, my colleague Bedi talked about high-level tourism being used for conservation purposes. We have done this in Rwanda, and maybe others can borrow a leaf. We had a problem of people disturbing our precious gorillas, which are one of the most precious products that we have in our tourism sector. And what we did was to innovatively come up with some community-based initiatives and some incentives to help the communities around the place where the gorillas are, so that they can also benefit and find no reason to actually go and disturb these chimpanzees and poach them and kill them and do the hunting in their habitation. And that has really helped a lot. In addition to that, Rwanda has also introduced what we call Kwitizina. I don't know whether some of you have heard of the Kwitizina. It's an annual event where we invite many people around the world, high-level dignitaries, celebrities in different areas, whether in political sector, media, or even the movie sector, and they come and they name these baby gorillas. And as much as it enhances the visitors that we have during that period, but the event is also held in that remote area close to that place, and the surrounding communities tend to benefit from the whole process. So I would say, yes, let's support high-level tourism to contribute to conservation efforts through community-based initiatives. Thank you.
Are you running, John?
Yes.
Thank you very much for your participation. Does anybody, we're now sort of at the end of the allocated time for tourism, but does anybody have one or two? I think there were two back here and then Sherry. All right, let's start at the back, there, and there. Right at the back.
Yeah, I'd like just to talk about cruise tourism. In terms of East Africa, like the port of Mombasa and the port of Dar, they have not really strategized. There is a huge potential in cruise tourism in terms of development of cruise terminals, development of marinas, and also another aspect, a very important area is the area of water sport fishing, which also has not been really been put, much effort has not been put into it. So if these areas are really tapped, I think in terms of revenue earnings of tourism, there will be more. And another issue maybe in terms of domestic, there is need for domestic, what we call segmentations, so that there is new products in terms of those people who cannot afford the high rates in terms of tourism in those areas, because tourism is high in terms of accessing the safaris and everything. But for the domestic, for example, people, if there can be some products which are low products in terms of costing, then they'll be able to be, in terms of accessing those services or tourism areas, they'll be able to afford. I think that will really improve the earnings also. And also having what we call our diversification of the market. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think there was somebody over here. Yes.
Thank you. My biggest concern is we can have the annexes, we can have good policy frameworks, but there is a very important strategic aspect which has to do with the security and stability of the region. And unless our states start to look at East African countries as sister and mother states, when you have an issue in Burundi, right now they are not here because it is a Burundian thing. We saw our political leaders fold their hands when that whole thing in Burundi was happening. We saw what happened. It was an issue of Kenya when they go to the bomb blasts. But unless we start to look at it from that perspective, because tourism has got the highest correlation with politics than any other sector, I would think, because it has this image issue. Then the other issue is what initiatives do we come up with to stop over-dependency on foreign visitors? If you asked a policymaker in Kenya, what is the initiative of the Kenyan entourage that is about to visit Uganda and see what is happening there? It's not there. When we ask Ugandans, what plan do you have to promote or between the tourism board of Rwanda and Uganda, it's not there. So when it comes to marketing, we need to change a little bit of our strategy, and we look at inside strategies, such that we have in between across the countries in terms of tourism entourages. I thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the panel. Most interesting. I seem to hear with all the speakers as a general conclusion that more and more tourism is better and better, and more tourism will necessarily lead to more growth, and this growth is good. I just think that in the tourism area, we just need to think about the context in which tourism growth takes place. And I think that that is very relevant to our sustainable development objectives, because many countries have found that not necessarily all tourism is good tourism, and it can be very environmentally destructive, and that it is not a long-term, and once you have sort of gone beyond limits, it's hard to sort of bring it back into control, because once numbers of hotels have been built and natural reserves and sort of pristine land has been destroyed, it's very hard to bring that back into existence again. So I just think tourism is an area, we generally think it doesn't need a lot of regulation, but in fact it really does need to be studied in terms of the most appropriate regulation that it needs, because it needs to be, growth in tourism needs to be set against other objectives that are very important in the environmental and sustainable development context. Thanks.
Thank you, Sherry. I think we've seen throughout the room here, I'm sorry, but we have to move on to our next sector now, a fair amount of concatenation around the key challenges of finance, regulation and policy, standards, skills, social concerns, political vulnerability, and also environmental concerns. So unless somebody has a completely different perspective or challenge to bring, I think we are ready to move on. Anybody got something to say that's completely different that hasn't been mentioned? Very briefly.
Private sector dialogue and private sector dialogue and advocacy with policymakers. I think that's something that hasn't come out very strongly. It's very strong in developed countries. It's very strong in the large developing countries. It's not coming out very clearly here, that we need to improve that.
Just a quick question. Listening to the various presenters, you could see obviously that in the region there is some sort of commonality in terms of the tourism offer, safari-based tourism, for example, but there are also important differences, like the idea of cultural tourism, cruise, and all. So I was thinking whether at the level of the EAC or maybe some other instance, is there sort of are we talking about a regional-based tourism package? Is there such an idea where when you attract tourists who essentially come to one country, you're also encouraging the tourists to go and take advantage of the other sort of features that other countries in the region offer? Is there such a thing or not?
Teen, was it you at the back there that wanted one last something that's not been
Thank
raised
you.
before?
No, just to build up on this last comment and the comment made by Sherry focusing on regulation, I was very interested to see that there were both policymakers and regulators in the room in addition to trade experts. And George referred to the experience of the SADC region and the SADC sectoral protocols. And actually, just to give you some additional information, at some point we found it very useful in the SADC negotiating machinery to involve the regulators and the professional associations, because when we talk about developing EAC as a region and coming up with a common product, we have found that the regulators, the professional associations are much more advanced in terms of understanding the region as a whole, and that maybe when we talk to trade negotiators and trade experts, they're more about the competition between the individual countries. So just to put that. And I did have a specific question for Tabita. I was very interested in coming here from the airport. The driver pointed out to me what he referred to as hotel services, which seemed to be some vendors selling some food. And actually, since that is restaurant services, it does fall under tourism. And he mentioned to me that now the Kenyan government has a policy whereby these small vendors need to get authorization. And I just wanted to know if Tabita could tell us a little bit more about that, because it has to do with formalization. And we mentioned that in the services sector, there's a lot still that's in the informal economy, and whether Kenya has any experience with bringing some of this within the formal economy. Thank you.
Or tomorrow, because we've really got 10 seconds. These are the kinds of issues we will try to address in the sectoral roundtables tomorrow. This is really a place where we just raise challenges. We'd now like to move on to the logistics sector, but since we've lost John, I need somebody here that knows the Rwandan paper very well. Nicholas, you have to come and do the 2 minutes. Okay. Well, let's just start in the meanwhile. And I think George was going to lead the discussion on logistics, starting with the Ugandan perspective and then 2 minutes from the others. Voila.
Well, do I need to go and stand up there, or I could use my seat where I am?
Use your seat where you are.
But somebody needs to give me the correct screen, because I'm still looking at JB's thank you. Yeah, Madam Chair, until yesterday, I did not know that I would be talking about logistics. Those who have read my draft paper would have noted that that I did not write about logistics. But when I walked in and saw Martin, I knew that Martin must have been working very, very closely with the ICTSD team, because 3 years ago, under the UNCTAD National Police Services Review exercise for Uganda, Martin and the UNCTAD team tasked me to undertake a policy review for Uganda. And so I go to look at the logistics. I'm not quite sure how to manipulate this thing, but hey, I just switched off. Oh. So I press.
Try the right-hand one.
The right takes me to the next slide.
Yeah.
Okay. So in the circumstances, ladies and gentlemen, do not assume that I have now this has been handed down from the Holy Spirit into that document. But logistics for Uganda. The study that I just made reference to, what we found out is that the distance to a seaport affects a geographical area's economic growth performance adversely. The other thing that I need to point out is that landlocked countries have significantly higher transport and therefore logistic costs than those that have got access to the sea. The other thing is that when you are as landlocked as Rwanda and Burundi are, your challenges are lots higher than Uganda, that has only one border to cross to deliver any products into Uganda. I thought that that should be at the back of our minds. Now, the other thing is that Uganda presently faces challenges of logistics that are beyond its control. When you are landlocked and you have the logistic challenges that Uganda has, solving those logistic challenges requires working in partnership with your neighbors. Now, if you are Rwanda and Burundi, then you don't just need to work with Kenya closely, but you must work closely with Uganda, and then everybody else up to when you get to Mombasa. Now, this is very important because of the currency that the Northern Corridor is gaining in the discussions on integration in the ESC. For those people who are so excited about the Northern Corridor being the Northern Corridor initiatives being the end game for all the challenges that we have, I want you to have that at the back of your minds. Now, the other thing that I must point out is that we have got very, very, very high costs of logistics. Probably Ethiopia, which is the world's biggest landlocked country, is the only country that betters us in terms of the disadvantages and challenges in logistic terms. I thought that that should be reflected upon. Now, the DTIS that the World Bank did in 2008, which will hopefully be updated very soon, indicates that congestion at Mombasa is Uganda's biggest logistic challenge. 95% of what Uganda imports comes through the port city of Mombasa. May I also mention that through Mombasa, one of those reasons why Kenya, whereas we depend probably up to 8, Kenya is Uganda's biggest trading partner. And Uganda is also Kenya's biggest trading partner. They may relate with the Chinese, they may relate with the US, but Kenya makes more money from us than anybody else that they trade with. But all this stuff comes through Mombasa. Now, when I'm talking about congestion at Mombasa, for those people who are very excited about the Northern Corridor, where we have reduced our minds in terms of solving all our logistic challenges on this port, please do have this at the back of your minds, that the East African coast stretches from Somalia and goes up to Mozambique. Now, in that stretch, apart from Lamu, which is a new port being built, we have a port in Tanga, we also have another one in Dar es Salaam. And the issue is, can we stop thinking a lot about the Northern Corridor and know that we need to diversify this, otherwise congestion in Mombasa may not be solved very soon. Now, going forward, the other logistic challenge, and it's good that my neighbor, while I'm not on this seat, is a Minister of Transport specialist, that Uganda has what are called community roads. The community road is that link from the very good roads that have been built over the last 30 years to where people do operate from. That's where the farmers are, that's where the shops are. Now, the community road is not one of those things that the National Roads Authority in Uganda works on. It's also that road which the local government will not work on because their mandate does not stretch up to the community road. It ends up to the road that connects the main road up to the sub-county headquarters. Now, this community road has turned into what in ICT terms we call the last mile. The last mile. It presents a very, very unique challenge, logistic challenge, to the farmers, because we are an agricultural country, and then to the traders and service providers that need to address the road. And so addressing these challenges will require that for Uganda, this is unique to Uganda, because what I've seen in my 18 years working around East Africa is that the community road is a Ugandan creation. Elsewhere, these roads are worked on by the big government, where the budgets are. Now, I prefer not to look a lot at challenges, but also look at the recommendations that I would put across to address the challenges that we have. Maybe I should have mentioned that one of the other things is that up to 100% of Uganda's haulage is by truck and by road. Now, you know that roads are the most inefficient and most expensive sources of logistics. Germany would not be the savior of Europe if they did not utilize the river that they have got. Now, for us, everything that we do in this country, gifted by nature, happens on the most expensive mode of transport, which is by road. Now, I'm suggesting among the reforms here in logistics that we need to prioritize railway and water transport because it is more efficient, and in regional terms, because remember what we said first, that you need to depend on your neighbors to be able to solve your logistic challenge when you are landlocked, such as Uganda. When we prioritize water and railway transport, this brings our neighbors into the equation of sorting out this issue. And the ESC provides a very wonderful framework to take advantage of this. I'm a little bothered about the standard gauge railway that we are doing together with the Kenyans. And for us in Uganda, we are still squabbling to decide who is going to build the railway. When the Kenyans, last month, their president was commissioning the terminus where the standard gauge railway shall dock when it gets into Nairobi. The Ugandans have not yet determined who is going to build ours. These are the kind of things we need to address. The other thing is that can we have deliberate measures to support Ugandan logistic businesses to grow their fleets? Whereas we depend on trucks, all that we own in this logistic equation is the road. The trucks that run on these roads largely belong to Yusuf and brothers and their Kenyan cousins. First, we own the road, but the trucks that run thereon belong to other people. ICTSD believes in inclusion. Can the Ugandans be? We need to think to have us get a stake in the haulage business, even as we think strategically to shift from the road to the railway and the water. Presently, we do not. The other bit I've mentioned about the Northern Corridor, can we also think about the Central Corridor? Because that's the only way we can decongest Mombasa. Because the Northern Corridor terminates in Mombasa, and then the next Northern Corridor will terminate in Lamu. So we are congesting the same part of the coast. But there's a very deep ports on the southern half of the East African coast. In Mutwara, you have got Dar es Salaam, you've got Tanga. Can we think beyond the Northern Corridor? Because this is a big market. And remember, it also services Congo. And then maybe before I do that, because I'm now going into the question of the community roads, I hope my brother from the Ministry of Transport will have something to say when he's allowed to speak. Now, looking at distribution, because I'm looking at both distribution and logistics, Distribution is very important for Uganda. Our labor indicators indicate that outside of tourism, the biggest number of Ugandans work in retail and wholesale. Now, in terms of contribution to the GDP by individual service sectors, distribution services do contribute the largest share of our GDP. And those slides, that slide which you have in my report would demonstrate consistently that wholesale and retail services have been contributing that much to our GDP. Now, the challenge that we have is that whereas this contribution is so big, we do not export distribution services. They are largely domestic. Those who are familiar with Kampala know that we have probably as the largest number of Nakumati stores operating outside Kenya. We also have Tuskys, which is a Kenyan distributor. And when the Kenyans come to Kampala, they enjoy shopping at Kenjoy, at Capital Shoppers. And the issue is, when are we going to export our distribution services to Kenya? Why this is important is that distribution interfaces with all the other sectors that we have. Now, whereas distribution is the Trojan horse on which Kenyan manufacturing runs, for us, Uganda, who do not have a working industrial manufacturing sector, the Trojan horse for our agriculture would actually be distribution. When you eat pineapples from Uganda, you'd wish to enjoy that taste of the pineapple in Nairobi. But you can only do that if there's a Ugandan distributor doing it. We have milk from where our president comes from. But from when Nakumat opened a supermarket in Mbarara, they're selling Brookside milk to Museveni's relatives. So that is what happens when you do not export your distribution services. The people who benefit, whoever takes advantage of the export opportunity displaces your players. And when they displace, it means that certain people are being excluded. We need to have that at the back of our minds. Because of what this slide is now saying. It interfaces quite a lot with several other key sectors. Now, I want to look at my thoughts in regard to which policy reforms do we need to do. Now, in Uganda, the Trade Licensing Act is the regulatory tool for distribution services. It's enforced by municipal authorities. They're the ones that issue this license. Now, but the guy who issues the license does not know that this is a regulatory tool for distribution services. They think it's a tool for collecting revenue. So they are going to license twice as many distributors as their buyers in a trading location, largely because they want to maximize their revenue collection. This is a very huge challenge. We need to appreciate the dual face of the license. It regulates, but at the same time is meant to collect revenue. And we need to strike a balance. You know, when do we maximize revenue? When do we keep an eye on the regulatory arm? Remembering, of course, Sherry's concluding remark about over-expanding. Sometimes you get stampeded out of the market that you have opened up to. So that is key. We need to address it. Now, the question of strict regulations and their enforcement. We have zoning regulations in Uganda that we have had since 1969. The ambassador, together with Sam, would remember the National pronouncement of 1969. When that license was introduced, there was a rule that would say that a big supermarket can only operate in a big town and not stretch out in the rural areas. The area was, the issue being that when you are a huge hyper Nakumat, you should only serve certain people, and then the small players in the neighborhood should be able to continue operating. The other zoning requirement was to require you to buy certain things from the location where you do operate. Now, when you do not enforce zoning regulations, Nakumat can ship carrots from Kenya and sell them to Uganda. The Tuskys supermarket, which was originally a mattress manufacturer, now is selling Kenyan mattresses when the best mattresses in this region are produced in Uganda. But there is no requirement for them to source locally. So distribution that is liberalized without strict regulation causes displacement. With strict enforcement of regulation, you actually get to include other people to participate in an effective liberalized market. This, I think, is a direction we may wish to take going forward. Now, yeah, I've got just one extra slide and I'm done. Now, there's need for special measures, ladies and gentlemen, to protect vulnerable players. My sister on the left will be happy to know that the largest people hired in the distribution chain are women. They operate small shops. The formalization that Martin is asking for, even in Uganda, the largest number of informal players are women. When you get big players, supermarkets, to operate without thinking about those other people that feed into the chain, they get stampeded, they get kicked out. So we need special measures. We need to enforce the zoning requirements so that those people can remain part of the value chain. Now, the question about small farmers. Yes, Kenyan carrots taste good, but it would taste better if the carrots were bought from Uganda, or if Ugandans were aided to be part of this chain. Presently, they do not seem to. And this is one thing we may wish to reflect on. Now, then there are these multiple retail outlet operators. You have them, they are all over the place. But we need to be mindful about the other guys, the Dukawalas, the small players who have always been in the market. How do you keep them participating in the chain? Because if they are not, and we eat dressed chicken from Brazil and South Africa, our entire agriculture sector is going to be wiped out. This, Madam Chair, is my last slide. Thank you very much.
You. Ready?
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Chairperson. In the Tanzanian paper, we focused more on logistics for reasons that would be very clear. We have 4,500 kilometers of railway, about 40% of it in good shape. That's the Tazara Railway to Zambia. But it's performing only around 20% because of management problems. And for the Central Railway line, it was closed down for about 10 years. We are reviving it, and at least we have been able to recover about 20% of the current capacity. And obviously, anybody, you read the economic literature, the essence of the Chinese locating all their special economic zones on port cities is that you have to find a way to surmount the transport costs. Bringing rice from Mbeya, where we have the best rice in Tanzania, to Dar es Salaam adds on almost 40% of the total price. From Thailand, it's only about 10%. But then having the roads, we also have 87,000 kilometers of roads. 6,000, of course, are passable tarmac. About 20% are regional and they're in good condition. But it's not enough to say we have the infrastructure if you don't look at how we are providing the services. Well, a large number of licenses have been issued, almost 50,000 for lorry operators. The logistics systems for the imports, it's well established. The private sector has been there for a long time. They have their own warehouses. They have logistics services in-house. We had problems in distribution of fertilizers until Yara from Norway came in about 3-4 years ago. The problem is gone. And when you go to exports, for the cash crops which have been there for years, again, there is no problem. The system is in place. But now we are diversifying the economy. We are saying we want to commercialize food staples, cereals, it's oilseeds, it's rice, it's maize. Last year we had a bumper harvest, more than 1 million tons of maize. And someone went somewhere to the Chinese and said, we would like to sell you maize. And the Chinese said, okay, give me 1 million tons. Now, where is that 1 million tons? Scattered in farmers' households. How do you collect it? How do you ensure standards? That how do you aggregate it? And we are, of course, working on building a commodity exchange, and they are looking at the warehouses. But at the moment, you don't have warehouses saving that will be able to link the farmers to the markets, even the regional markets. What happens is that the Kenyans will come with their trucks, they would buy, Tanzanians would take rice to Uganda, they would sell. But when it goes big, you are looking for 400,000 tons, it becomes a headache. And that's where we have to look, and that's where we are looking. Of course, working with processors, working with large farmers, is part of the solution, and it's been happening. The challenges are, of course, the policies. So we may get investors, they invest in farming, they contributed to those 400,000 tons extra of rice. They have the warehouses, they know how to look after the standards, they can take care of their outgrowers, but then sometimes policy changes, unstable policies, throw a spanner into the works, and then people ask themselves, is it worthwhile to stay in? These are some of the problems that we have and which we have to address. And the other message which comes out is that we cannot afford to lose the sight of East Africa as an entity. If we lose sight of that one, even then the domestic market becomes a nightmare. So Kenya will have arrangements to buy rice from Pakistan in exchange for tea, which incidentally also happens to be Tanzanian tea, and locks out Tanzanian rice. Sometimes we import rice and it finds, or rice is smuggled into Tanzania and it finds its way into neighboring markets. And because of that, we are Tanzanian legitimate exports are faced the 75% CET rate, and these are things which we could control the industry through formalizing the logistics systems, and that is ongoing work. In between, it's urgent, and if we don't address it, we are addressing it. If we don't succeed, then I don't know. We may talk of East Africa as a political union in the near future, but if we can't make it where the money is in the economy, then the politics have no solid foundation on which to stand. So those are the challenges we are facing. They are more or less the same as Uganda. The good news is that we are addressing the challenges faced at the Dar es Salaam port. The handling capacity for handling containers at Dar es Salaam port is a very small port, developed by the Germans almost 100 years ago. And to solve the problem, we have established more than 20 dry ports scattered all over Dar es Salaam. And you can imagine the nightmare it creates when you are dealing with 20 dry ports, and the standards people, the food hygiene people, have to shuttle from one dry port to another one. We have an investor who's putting up a large one in Kibaha now. We hope it will solve the problem. And of course, bringing back the Central Railway line is the real solution, at least as it is, not in terms of standard gauge. The standard gauge one, I think they have what they call transaction advisor looking into it, whether it's going to be economically feasible. We have nickel in Bukoba, there is nickel in Burundi, and without the railway, you can't bring those out. So it will be feasible, and that's the way we are going. But the immediate solution is, of course, recovering the capacity of the existing railway to carry more than the 20%, 200,000 tons it carried last year. And, well, that's it. Thank you.
Okay, Tabitha, brief comment?
Yeah, thank you, Deborah. I will talk about logistics in Kenya, and most important thing to note is that the transport sector contributes around 8% to Kenya's GDP, is the fastest growing sector in Kenya, and you must appreciate that our airport is actually a mega hub, and it's actually growing very, very fast. Apart from that, we also have other airstrips, such that you'll find an international airport in Eldoret, in Mombasa, in Kisumu, and we have quite a number of other airstrips, so that, well, the connectivity is not so much, but we are trying. Yeah. Apart from that, we also have rail transport, and we are talking about the standard gauge railway, and we also have the old Kenya-Uganda railway that was built by the Indians those old days. And but in terms of waterways, we have very few navigable rivers. I think we only have Sagana, which a bit of surfing usually takes place. But for waterway, we only have the Port of Mombasa and Lake Victoria. And in terms of road transport, we have what we call now the Thika Superhighway that connects the eastern side with the Nairobi and the central side, and then after that it goes all the way to Maraba. And the road network is there, but not what would be expected for a country like Kenya. And there is very little connectivity, such that there are some areas in Kenya that think that they're actually not in Kenya. They would rather go shop across the border. Yeah, especially the northeastern part is not very well connected to the rest of the country. And they usually say, actually, they think that they're not Kenyans, that they're not in Kenya. And the quality of roads is not very, very good because apart from the Thika Superhighway, which is also experiencing issues, because they usually say it's not, when it rains, it's actually floods. There are others, potholes are the order of the day. And apart from that, where we have the main trunk road, we lack feeder roads. And of course, that means that produce that comes from the rural areas does not reach the markets. And especially very fertile areas like the Rift Valley, there's a place called Nyandarua. It grows a lot of vegetables, a lot of carrots and all that, but they rot because they cannot reach the market. And apart from that, now this leads to high transport costs. And of course, high transport costs leads to our goods not being competitive in the world market. And of course, it also increases the amount of time. And if it is a horticultural produce needs to be refrigerated, that increases transport costs. And of course, if the areas where the produce is coming from, there are no refrigeration facilities, then that means that the produce gets spoiled. Now, what we need also to remember is that the transport sector has got various players. And if it is the road transport, we have it privately run. We have what we call the matatus, as somebody mentioned. These are privately owned vehicles that are usually used to transport people. Trucks are also privately owned. And we also have another now mode of transport called the boda boda. These are the motorbikes. Now, these are highly regulated, although we have a national transport safety authority, but it doesn't have the authority to arrest and prosecute. So what has happened, yes. So what has happened is that a vehicle that is registered to transport people is transport goods is transporting people. And what has happened is lots of accidents, borders, accidents, and so on and so forth. So what we are saying is that, and apart from that, there is very little harmonization in terms of gross maximum weight for vehicles in the East African region. So that some vehicles in Uganda could be having so much in terms of tail weight, in terms of axle load, and so on and so forth. So that one needs harmonization for trade to take place in the East African region. Thank you very much, Deborah.
Thank you. Nick will just fish some things out of the Rwandan paper for us quickly, and then we'll summarize and move on.
I'm not a Rwandan logistics expert, but this is just what is drawn out of the paper. Rwanda is still a net logistics and transport importer. It imported about $335 million worth of transport and logistics services in 2011. And the Rwandan government has targeted logistics and transport as, the Rwandan government has targeted transport and logistics as one of the focus sectors for its Vision 2020 plan. Because the goal is for Rwanda to be a net exporter of logistics and distribution services by 2020. In terms of some of the challenges that have been identified, the main challenges highlighted by key operators relate to the responsiveness and reliability of specifically road transport services. Rwandan firms have claimed that they're disadvantaged by VAT regulations, so they're not allowed to claim VAT on imported inputs, while in other EAC partners this is permitted. There are issues associated with withholding tax on foreign partners with foreign operators in EAC partners, which Rwanda does not do. And then more kind of technical or material problems, such as the prohibition on right-hand wheel semi-trailers and haulers. Although this restriction was lifted in 2009, it has still taken some time to come into play. The reason I say it's technical is because right-hand wheel drive vehicles are actually cheaper to import than left-hand wheel drive vehicles. So for operators, obviously there's an advantage for them to have access to right-hand drive vehicles. Then there are also issues associated with cabotage restrictions that was highlighted by the operators. So yeah, I'll end it there.
Well, thanks very much, Nick. So it seems, in general, logistics is a very challenging sector to think about how to develop and how to use for sustainable and discussion tomorrow. It's clear from what some of our presenters have said so far that there are some significant challenges here, and a lot of them relate around high costs for a number of different reasons, related to being landlocked or not, or related to the infrastructural problems. There's certainly huge amounts of regulatory challenge that we're beginning to uncover, in fact, across a wide variety of regulatory and policy issues. Among the sort of opportunities we're seeing are clearly railway opportunity is something that clearly can be exploited, but that again is a high investment issue. So it'll be very interesting to talk through these things tomorrow. We've seen also, well, I don't really want to go into the details of the policy things. I think what I'd like to do right now is just ask the floor if anybody has any particular insight onto a policy challenge or any other challenge that hasn't been mentioned yet that we can table up and table up for discussion tomorrow.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to speak a bit around the policy area on logistics. I see Tanzania as the policy needs to be based on competitive advantages. And I see Tanzania stand a chance to become the East Africa logistic hub, based on the fact that Tanzania borders 8 countries. And out of those, 6 countries are landlocked, except Kenya and Mozambique. Over and above, Tanzania has 3 lakes, Victoria, Tanganyika, and Nyasa. But then, also in look on Tanzania, we currently have covered about 22,000 fiber optical cable. It's laid down. It's a leading country, apart from Egypt, which telecom obviously support logistics. Then we have 7 big network, mobile networks. The coverage is available, communication is available everywhere. Then we have 3 submarine cable terminating Dar es Salaam. So obviously we connect the rest of Africa in terms of telecom. Then we have good loads connecting Dar es Salaam port with the rest of the port. But then we have 3 functional ports, Tanga, Dar es Salaam, Mtwara, which obviously can actually serve all 8 countries. Then there's a new port coming, the Bagamoyo port. Obviously, then in the near future, we'll have 4 ports serving the rest of East Africa. The policy issue, or the issue that I'm actually seeing in East Africa, that we are not looking at the region as one entity. Each individual country, regardless whether it is in the best position or not, they are fighting to develop a different project, which is counterproductive. If it's easier to move or to ship a consignment from Dar es Salaam to Rwanda easily, you don't need to pass in another country, or to Burundi, DRC, or even Uganda, because from Tanga Port, you're in Lake Victoria, you offload the wagons, you put in the ship, you're back in Kampala. It's very easy and very straightforward. So on the policy aspect, we need to look on the competitive advantage and how do we leverage on those competitive advantage to develop an efficient and effective logistic hubs, because that's then we'll be able to support the manufacturing, and even tourism. Having said so, you look on Kenya, for instance, you come to Nairobi, it's a hub in terms of aviation, because they have developed that capacity. There's no, of course, there's a need for Tanzania, for instance, the airline. We don't have the national airline. Air Tanzania, I think, I've got two planes, if not mistaken. There's no point for Tanzania to invest heavily in that. We could just invest heavily in the rail line, roads, ports, then leave the other aspect in Kenya to invest heavily now in the aviation, because they have already developed that capability. So in so doing, then we will turn the East Africa market as an engine of growth for the rest of Africa. So those are just my comments. It's something that I wanted to highlight for everyone to understand the unique endowment of Tanzania. It's not only on tourism, but we have 3 out of 7 attractions in Africa. The 3 best attractions are in Tanzania. But these are just natural endowment. So we need to develop policy based on those aspects. Thank you.
Thank you, and also for raising this issue of using competitive advantages to drive effective regional competitiveness, I should say. Yes.
Thank you very much. I certainly want to agree with the gentleman who's just ended, but I would also like to ask Tanzania to be a bit more fair with your cross-border tariffs, especially when it comes to other East African nationals. But my question was to do with, it actually came about when George was presenting, and he was asking the question about Nakumat and the Brookside milk. So it brought to mind a debate that has been going on in Kenya with regard to the Ugandan sugar. So if Kenyan products can easily come into Uganda, I don't know why the Kenyans were making a fuss about the Ugandan sugar. So maybe someone at some point can enlighten us on what the issue was then. In terms of harmonization of regulations and distribution, I also heard last week when we were having a meeting, someone actually commented and said that Tanzania imported duty-free rice and then again was exporting it to the East Africa region. So my question was, did you really need the duty-free rice?
Perhaps we could leave the sugar and milk discussion for over tea, where it's very appropriate. And really, let's focus on distribution services here, logistical services, and what the challenges are. But these other issues I recognize are important and underlying issues, but maybe we take them up in the networking sections. Yes, at the end there.
Thank you. I just have 2 brief questions to George about the distribution services. So we've seen a lot of price regulations by most of the East African partner states on within the distribution sector, which again affects competition. We have price regulations on gas and on gas and sugar in Burundi. You have price regulations on gas and pharmaceutical products in Rwanda. Same thing with Uganda. So this, why our governments continuing to this practice, yet it affects this industry? 2, if you run around the distribution sector in East Africa, we've seen that our local companies are absent in the franchising business. We've seen this business being dominated by foreign distributors. Why is this trend still coming up? Thank you.
Thank you.
The last one. This will be brief. When you talk about services here, initially you think of services in category of WTO, the 12 subsectors, and the 155 going down the line. And distribution will be there in services. But then you put logistics, it's, in my mind, I see trade facilitation and a MC agreement coming out of the year in Nairobi here, WTO, Ministerial Conference in Nairobi, in which trade facilitation will be a major issue and logistics comes in, border issues and ports. I see as, well, are you not mixing port issues and actual distribution? I'm just thinking, asking for guidance. Because if you talk about distribution, as it is in the GATT, Chow, I'm sure you're with me on this, on distribution services, it is the normal services sector and what goes with it, and is classified. Now, when you come to logistics now, it is the trade facilitation, border issues, customs, but I see our discussion has spread so much on that. I just needed guidance on that. Thank you.
I think you're right. The discussion has widened, and it shows us increasingly the sort of intertwined nature of these kinds of issues. Over here, and then Sherry, and then we'll break for tea.
Thank you, Chair. I was really impressed by the discussion made by Mr. George about the distribution system. That made me recall that there is still a problem of distribution within East Africa. Why am I saying so? He mentioned about the distribution of a supermarket, Nakumat maybe, in Kampala. I'm not sure if there is the same supermarket made from Uganda set in Nairobi. That's just an example. Now, this has been a problem, maybe due to regulations or policy or what. We have Nakumat in Tanzania as well as Uchumi. But through my coming to Nairobi, I have never seen Imalaseko supermarket. That's the major supermarket we have in Dar es Salaam and Mwanza. The same with breweries, maybe. If I need to drink Serengeti beer, Tanzanian product, I can't get it in Nairobi or Kampala. Now, during the negotiations of common market, we opened up some of the sectors. I'm not sure if all were opened. Maybe it depended on the country, which sectors were open between one and another. Maybe we will go back and try to have a dialogue of opening up so that we get a fair distribution of these products. I remember there have been a problem of transporting some products from Tanzania to Kenya. Some were not allowed to enter through Namanga customs border. A lot of reasons were given, and some were even taken back. We had so many complaints in the office. Why is being done?
Please try to
to
what the issues at hand.
That was my concern, that maybe something should be done. If all the countries really open up for one another, it should be free, and all the leaders should really have one common stand on this. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, right.
Thank you again. My name is Joseph Kapeko. I work with Kenya Maritime Authority, which is a regulator of the maritime industry. First, I would just like to highlight one of the reports which was mentioned by Mr. George, the 2000 report. There has been new development in terms of port developments at the Port of Mombasa. We have had infrastructural development in terms of terminals which have been created. Over 250,000 berth capacity or TEUs have been enhanced. Also, there is a new container terminal which is ongoing in terms of development. And in the next year, about 450,000 additional TEUs also will be included. That terminal is, when it will be finalized or completed, it will have a capacity of about 1.2 million TEUs. The port also was dredged. Now it can accommodate depths of 13.5 meters. In fact, recently, one of the largest vessels to be received at the Port of Mombasa, Maersk Clemens, berthed there with about 6,000 TEUs of cargo. So there has been really developments in terms of port. One of the key challenges is the rail, because it only, in terms of evacuation of the port, what you call cargo, only less than 10%. And last year, for example, the port handled about over 1 million TEUs in terms of container capacity, and also over 28,000 metric tons of cargo. But we are challenged with the rail capacity in terms of uptake of cargo, or uptake of cargo. The road is carrying almost all the cargo, over 90%, and this is overburdening the roads and sometimes creating road congestion. That even the transit, what we call movement of cargo from the port of Mombasa to Kampala has also improved in terms of times. So I think we are in the right direction. As we also have what we call a port community charter, where various stakeholders in the industries which are involved in the clearance of cargo, they have signed the charter, and they have to meet some minimum obligations in terms of service delivery standards. As an authority also, we have a project under World Bank. We are developing also standards, and it has already been contracted to a consultancy. We are developing standards for the whole industry in terms of the maritime players and also the other players involved in the clearance of cargo, so that they'll be able to also to comply with minimum standards of delivery. And this is important. Maybe another area which you want to mention is some very important concepts in terms of logistics which are necessary. We have trade facilitation, which we already have our WTO trade facilitation agreement, which its implementation will also help to improve the logistics efficiency. We also have key issues like the multimodal networks efficiency, which is still lacking in the whole of East Africa, which is key. Also, the other important issue is the global value chains, which needs also to be enhanced so that we can take advantage of fully of the logistics efficiency. Thank you.
Thank you. Final comment from Sherry, very briefly. Try to bring us back to focus.
Thanks. I am actually going to try and put this in a bit of focus. I think this is a complex area. I think it's a very important area. I think definitions here are helpful in a certain sense. When we're talking about logistics, it can be a different kind of package for different people, but generally the logistics package seems to include transport, telecommunications, and efficient border operations as a minimal package. So we're talking about these three. Sometimes authors go further, like the World Economic Forum. When it looks at logistics, it goes further. It includes express delivery services, distribution, and more efficient institutions. So when people look at this issue, there's like a minimum core, and then it can be viewed a little bit broader. It's notable that there's not one ministry in the world in any country other than, I think, Panama that has a ministry for logistics. So it's very hard for a government to view this in a coherent manner. Most of these issues are under the jurisdiction or competency of different ministries. It's hard to view them together. I don't have a lot of time. One could speak a lot on this area. I just want to say that this is an area where really tremendous gains can be potentially obtained from not just liberalization, but it's better, it's improvement in a variety of different ways. It's improvement in infrastructure build-out. It's improvement in more efficient institutions as they operate customs, and of course more efficient services. And so just to conclude, I'd like to draw your attention to a World Bank report that appeared in 2013. It's called Enabling Trade, Valuing Growth Opportunities. And here it's really important. It showed that if countries in the world could improve their logistics performance, measured, I mean, in terms of transport, telecom, and better customs or border procedures, if they could improve this just halfway to the world of best practice, to the level of world best practice, they could increase their GDP 6 times more than if they eliminated all tariffs in the world. And that's really a tremendously impressive conclusion, and that it was the sub-Saharan African region that would actually benefit the most of all the different regions in the world from this type of logistical improvement. So it's a very legitimate area for us to be focusing on in their services discussion. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Sherry. And indeed, we see that while this is an appallingly complex and challenging sector to deal with, it really is a sort of like enabling or facilitating sector for so much else that we try to do in our economies. It's very difficult to summarize the kinds of challenges that we've come across in looking at this, but certainly the issue of rail capacity, which is related to the issue of high costs, and the other infrastructure challenges, the vast and complex array of regulatory and policy challenges, and the need and the possible role for regional policy as improving coherence and really improving efficiency would be would be really, really valuable. At that, I think we'll stop there. Heaven help the table that looks at this sector tomorrow afternoon, but please, those people that feel up to the challenge, take it up. We'll now break for tea for 10 minutes and then come back and deal with our next sector, financial services.
Good afternoon, colleagues. Shall we settle down and resume our discussions? That's right, yeah. Yeah, we can now resume our discussions. Colleagues, if you can settle down. The next sector presentation is by Bede Limo, and we're looking at developing financial services. So Bede, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chairman. We chose to include the financial sector in the study on Tanzania, in the country assessment for Tanzania, because of its power as an enabler. The financial sector has been growing at the economy. Because it's an enabler and it supports the high growth sectors in the economy, we thought it would be useful to look very briefly at the state of the economy now. It's been growing by 7% average over 5 years. Manufacturing has been growing by about, is the leading in growth, but 40% of it comes from mining. Tourism, construction, transport, and finance are high growth sectors, around 10%, plus or minus a percentage point. But in spite of all these, income poverty is still a problem, down to 28% of the population. We have 1 million school leavers joining the economy each year. Out of a working population of 19 million, only 2.3 were in the formal public and private sector. And a survey in 2012 revealed 3.1 million MSMEs, 70% of them informal. So the problems is quality of skills, mismatch between low, medium, and high level skills. The current ratio is 3 to 13 to 84 out of 100 versus the conventional ratio of 12, 34, 54 for high skilled, medium skilled, and low skilled. So we are told that if we are going to achieve Vision 2025, we have to grow by 15%, and that's the challenge where we say which services sectors we have to prioritize. Where are the jobs? So we picked those tourism, transport, recreation, focusing on the youth, and then of course finance. And in finance, we are looking at banking sector and insurance. In the banking sector, we had 3 banks in the 1990s. Privatization came in towards the end of 1990s. Today we have not 52, actually 54. I missed the 2. 54 financial institutions in place. The 4 largest banks dominate the industry with about 50% of market share in terms of whatever factor you want to look at it. Those are the names there. The government still has a minority shareholding in 3 of the banks, generally around 20–25%. And those 4 large ones, they hold 54% of the assets and loans, 56% of deposits, 49% of capital, but they earned 72.8% of profit before tax. And their costs were considerably low, 50% of the total cost of the sector. Total deposits stand at about 20.6 trillion in 2014. That's roughly about $10 billion. And 2 of the leading banks share about 250 branches countrywide among them. The small banks are also not sleeping. They are presenting a major challenge to the big banks. One of the banks, Bank M, grew at 440%, CBA at 233% in 2014. And total bank assets as a GDP of ratio is 43% and growing at 16%. It's a hungry economy. You have seen it's very informal. And from that perspective, you can see where the financial sector is going. It's growing, and it's not yet enough. Financial inclusion is a mere 15%, and there is talk of doubling it to 30% by 2017. And we do hope mobile money, internet banking will help to move towards that target of financial inclusion. And so the strategies in place, moving away from brick and mortar branches to e-banking, agency banking. Agency banking is strong in Kenya. It's one of the lessons where we picked from Kenya and Brazil. Mobile branches, sending branches on trucks to remote corners, and if they are viable, then you do the needful. Service center, literally almost like a branch in a container, and deposit-taking ATMs, harnessing technology to reach out. Yet, Tanzania largely remains a cash economy, and it's obvious because of the high level of informality, as we have seen from the data. And some of the challenges is that in reaching out, it's a hungry market, and if you don't carve out a niche early, then you are lost out. One bank established 20 branches in 2014-15. Looking at the numbers, 2 banks have gone regional in Burundi, Comoro, and Djibouti. And, well, the other side, the downside is that the government remains the largest borrower and to a certain extent squeezing out the private sector. And so that is the banking sector is growing. There are challenges there. The insurance, again, liberalized in 1996. Today, we have about 30 insurance companies. 7 of them are domestic, national, so to speak, in 2014. And the total number of providers, about 440. Industry is regaining popularity and confidence. During the last part of the 90s and the first 5 years of 2000, where people didn't want to hear of insurance companies because premiums, policies were maturing, there was no payback. The state firm which took us there is still in limbo. They have not been able to restructure it. Still on the table. And the industry is growing, again, by 21.8% in 2009. Lower rates now, but still growing. For instance, in agriculture, there is no insurance service except in, particularly in primary production. But in agricultural marketing, of course, you can't do without it. And poor guys there, we know of people who have taken loans and drought comes and they don't harvest and the house goes, and some of them have taken the hard way out, lost hope and eliminating themselves. Things like that shouldn't happen for entrepreneurs, and insurance can remove some of those risks, and that's the challenge, one of the challenges we have in Tanzania. Capacity development needs, we do have challenges in skills across the board, including the financial sector. It's a little bit different in the financial sector because it has the capacity to train its own people. I know there was a year one bank recruited 250, following year 300. Can you imagine having in your workforce 300 new workers out of a total workforce of less than 2,000? It's a big challenge, but that's what is happening. So the salvation, of course, comes from that the banking sector has harnessed IT for a long period now. We are moving into second generation programs as the the volume of clientele crosses 1 million customers. The regulatory framework for the banking sector is fine. Lending in terms of sector, the biggest sector borrower is the agricultural sector, particularly marketing, manufacturing, with agriculture takes about 20. This is for one bank, and manufacturing and transport about 9%. Then construction, hotels, electricity, financial intermediation, microfinance institutions, SACCOs, reaching out to the small guys, the informal sector, they take about 5%. So these are some of the things that are happening. Problems, yes, we do have problems of seizure, forfeiture of collateral. People know how to play tricks in the courts. Cases can go on for 10 years. Injunctions, we have what we call a permanent injunction culture. They are working on it, but the solution hasn't come out yet. Squeezed margins, the larger depositors would force through higher deposit rates and lower lending rates. And those are challenges the sector has to live with. And of course, the biggest challenge is making the new market, how to bring in that large, huge. I'm told Kenya inclusion is about 30–40%. So how do we move from 15% closer to that number? The idea is that the studies done in 2003 revealed that about 29 billion assets, mostly landed property, land developed, they have no titles, and so these, we call them dead assets. You can't use them for business. And plans to formalize are starting with that. How do we formalize property in urban areas? 80% of the properties in Dar es Salaam are informal, and you can imagine what that means when you look at the skyline of Dar es Salaam. And so because of that, because of its link, and as an enabler, a supporter of the high growth sector, we are saying literally, including education, it's reaching out to all the SDGs. And the regional dimension, well, Kenya has gone regional, Tanzania is going regional. There is a regional dimension and it's one of the ways to strengthen how to bring about the region thinking of itself as an entity, and not I'm Tanzanian, I'm Kenyan, I'm Ugandan, I'm Rwandan. No, I am East African. Asante sana.
Thank you, Bede. I now invite Tabitha to make comments from the Kenyan perspective.
Yeah, thank you very much, Darrington. I'll talk about the Kenyan financial sector, and as has already been said by Tanzania, that Kenya is actually leading the way in terms of financial services. And Kenya's financial sector is the 4th largest in Africa, and is one of the most sophisticated in the continent. And the banking sector is actually the largest of the subsector, where we have insurance, we have the capital market, we have pension, and the SACCOs and all. And apart from that, we have quite a number of players in the banking sector. We have both the public and private. The government owns a certain number of banks. The private sector owns around 25 banks. And Kenya has also gone regional. It has opened 282 branches in the East African community and also in the South Sudan. And access to banking has also increased, such that around 52% of the people in Kenya are living within 3 kilometers of access to a bank agent. We also have what we call the agency banking model, which has actually increased the financial sector deepening in Kenya. Now, apart from that, a lot of other models have been used, especially what we are calling M-Pesa, such that one can receive and send money in real time. And that one has actually increased the number of people, the number of people who have access to financial services. And apart from that, there are quite a number of challenges, because what has been happening is that most of the banks, even when they are within 3 kilometers, I said 51%, but even when we are within this region, most of the banks are usually found in urban areas, and of course this makes the rural areas lack financial services. Now, other challenges are like limited road networks. When we were talking about logistics, I talked about the quality of loads in Kenya, so that if you want to bank, to have access to banks, then you have to plan from morning to go to a bank, that is, you are using banks. Then we also talked about, we shall talk later about ICT. Although there is increased telephony, there are some areas that don't have access to that. Issues of energy, because for you to operate a bank, or to give financial services, and especially when it comes to sending and receiving money, then you need to have energy, that is power, but some areas don't have electricity, although the government is trying so much to address that. Issues to do with the internet, and so on and so forth. And apart from that, we would say that even when we have this kind of financial sector deepening, the poor people are not really banked, we would say, because only 1% of assets bonds are located in areas with the poorest people, where 13% of the population live. And apart from that, where we have all these banks, we have different banks using different softwares, and they don't share the same software, so that if you have to access your money in the bank that is nearest to you, it becomes very, very expensive. That if I have an account with Barclays, and where I am is the Standard Bank that is there, then I'll pay an arm and a leg to withdraw some money from an ATM, or from a Standard Bank ATM. Apart from that, to open a bank, you require what you call the minimum capital of around 5 billion Kenya shillings. And of course, this locks out people who would want to start small and medium enterprises in terms of banking. Apart from that, there is what you would call weak client protection, so that most banks will charge so much in terms of interest. When you want to borrow a loan, they'll charge, they'll give very little in terms of interest rate on what you have deposited. In other words, the interest spread is quite big. And of course, when these banks usually go under, the amount of money that you'll be given back to you, it's very, very little. If you have banked $1 million, I don't know whether it is over 100,000, around 100,000. If you have banked $1 million and you get only 100,000, means that's very weak protection. And apart from that, you have huge banks and other small banks, meaning that these big banks, which are mainly multinational corporations, they become the dominant players, which results to more or less like monopoly. Now, apart from banking, we would also talk about insurance, which is also another financial sector, and less than 3% of Kenyans are insured, or they have access to, they are insured, and it's mainly because it is not compulsory. It is not compulsory for you to have insurance, except for vehicle, and for vehicles it's third party. That's the only one that is compulsory. But Kenya is trying very hard. We have what we call the National Hospital Insurance Fund, which they are trying to market and making it a bit compulsory, although there is a little bit of resistance. Then we also have the National Social Security Fund, which they are also trying to market, but there is still some bit of resistance. And the Retirement Benefit Authority is mainly for the people who are formerly employed, although the government is also trying to come up with a regulation and trying to market it so that people who are also in the informal sector can also think of what will happen when they are not able to work in terms of pension. In other words, although we have what we call a high level of financial deepening in Kenya, we still have lots and lots of such challenges, and there is lack of interconnectedness. So that if I'm insured by a company in Kenya, when I go to Uganda, I cannot use the same. I'll have to come back to Kenya to assess if I incur an accident there, then it means they'll have to come to Kenya. And apart from that, even the banks, if apart from the ones that have opened branches out there, there is very little in terms of interconnectedness. The policy regulations in Uganda or Tanzania is very different from the one that is in Kenya, so that you'll have to have access to your own bank. I cannot just go to an ATM in Uganda and withdraw money. I cannot just go to an ATM, even though it is Barclays, in Tanzania and withdraw money. So this kind of lack of coordination, even when you are talking about the whole East African region, that one is lacking, and I think we need to think about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tabitha. George, Ugandan perspective?
Thank you very much, Ambassador, Mr. Chairman. I was debating when my colleagues were submitting whether I shouldn't preserve my 2 minutes for when we get to discuss IT-enabled services, because those who have had a chance to look at our paper, we've looked at mobile financial services, but from an IT-enabled services perspective, and not. So, Mr. Chair, if you just indulge me to carry my 2 minutes, and maybe I've used a few seconds, so that when we get to discuss IT-enabled services, then I can have a little more time so I can talk about mobile financial services. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, and that's it's called efficiency. Let me then ask the participants to give their comments. Now, I need to reiterate what my previous colleague was in the chair emphasized. The exercise that we are having now is bringing out the challenges from these 4 sectors that we're looking at. Those challenges are then going to be considered in our group discussions in order to come up with solutions, policy options that we may recommend for these sectors to enhance growth. So for now, let's try and bring out the challenges. So yes, you may have the floor.
Thank you very much for a good presentation from the top, from the high table, Betty, Ambassador, George, and Tabitha. Tabitha, you've done well, particularly showing what the banking sector in Kenya is. And there's much more to get out of it. Could be because of time she couldn't say it all. And I think there's an ACTAD publication, it was on 2005, on banking in Kenya. There was me and Dr. Kerry, we did a paper on it. It shows much of the background what she said. You see, if you look at Kenya's financial sector, it's wider, because there's the banks, there's the stock exchange market, which is mentioned, there's the pension fund, because the insurance sector mentioned here, microfinance, cooperatives, and the whole lot. So there's a lot in it, which we can use to learn in the region. It's much so that I remember one time I was shocked when I was in Nigeria. That was last year. I wanted to change my money. You can't get where to change. The banks, they close, I think, at a given hour. They don't open the bank exactly at 9 o'clock because the manager was still having a meeting inside. They open at 9:30, things like that. But in Kenya, it's a different scenario, and Tabitha has just put it right. It's only the time was not on her side. Now, the question I wanted to ask, the purpose of coming in, is that normally when a bank is lending, when the bank is asking for security, it's because the money does not belong to the bank. It belongs to the depositor, which if you default, the banks will be in trouble. So that's why the bank would charge you interest, that's what they earn, and then they would insist on security. Now the question is, Mr. Bedi, you mentioned that in Tanzania, a whole place like Dar es Salaam, about 80% of land, there's no documentation. Uganda, I think, is also a challenge, because in Kenya, in fact, much of the land in Kenya is called, there's article association. If there's a lawyer, they will tell you. Much of the land here in Kenya is registered. So there's a title and a title deed which shows that this so is the owner of this land for a given period or whatever it is. Now, in Uganda and Tanzania, when the banks are lending, is that a challenge or not? Particularly when there are no title deeds. What securities are they having? Thank you.
Deborah?
I just want to ensure that since John left, the Rwandan situation is not entirely ignored. So I'll just bring out a couple of points from the Rwandan paper. But I do not know Rwanda. I've never even been there, so I beg that my Rwandan colleagues here will correct me when I set a foot wrong, as I'm sure I will. The key findings that I see from the paper, however, is that there is a small financial sector in Rwanda which is, however, very keen to grow and has clearly made this a priority. So there are a few commercial banks. There's a reasonable representation along the range of financial services providers, from commercial banks to insurance, microfinance, and public pension fund. But however, it looks to me at this cursory glance that it's very small and that the challenges are really related to the kinds of challenges we customarily see in growth. They seem to think that they have a decent regulatory framework and that the focus, however, should be on looking at the gaps in the regulatory framework and seeing where more is needed. However, what is clear to me as a challenge in Rwanda is that this is not a country where there's high levels of savings, there's not high levels of wealth in society, and I wonder to what degree this translates as to a challenge for an emerging financial sector in having a sufficient asset base to grow at any credible pace. They also talk about having an infrastructure shortfall in terms of the necessary electronic and, in fact, physical, in terms of ATMs, etc., infrastructure that are needed to grow substantially, and especially for reaching rural areas, how you deliver that. Thirdly, they point to the challenge of ensuring compliance with and sort of coherence with international standards for banking. For any kind of sector, financial sector seeking to grow regionally or even within the continent as a whole, it would be critical to be able to comply with and know what these standards are. And finally, of course, the challenge they identify is the classical challenge we see here, which is about capacity. The financial sector is a highly skilled sector, and it requires very specific training and skills enhancement, and they see that as a challenge. So I offer that, but I'm happy to be shot down by any Rwandan expert in the room here.
Thank you. Over there, the lady over there.
Okay. Let me take the opportunity to thank the panelists for the presentation and the insights. I'm Laura from Kenya, and what we've been seeing in the Kenyan market is that there's a lot of consolidation going on the financial sector, where there's a lot of mergers, acquisitions, and joint ventures, all in a bid to offer a one-stop shop. So you have a bank offering credit facilities, the normal banking facilities, it's offering insurance, it's offering mobile money transfer, it's offering the stock market services, and of course you're also having the insurance offering the same area of services. You're having mobile companies offering the same area of services. So I think my question to the panelists will be, what effect does this have to the value of the service that the end user is getting? And knowing very well there's no specialization. It's more of trying to offer that competitive edge. But I'm not very keen about the value that will eventually go to the end user. The second one is do you think this is something that is sustainable? I mean, if you can borrow from what has happened to other markets where the same happened, do we stand in a place where we need to really look at it critically and cushion ourselves from an imminent collapse, knowing very well that what really drives any form of economic activity is the value at the very end?
Thank you very much. Over here and then next there.
Thank you. I would like to say a little bit about Tanzania, the banking sector. Bedel's presentation has revealed that the banking sector is being dominated by 4 main banks. And these 4 main banks include the 2 South African-controlled owners, that is the National Bank of Commerce and the National Microfinance Bank. With the exception of CRDB Bank, the other 3 major banks still insist on traditional lending conditions. That is the issue of collateral. So, and he has also revealed that from the survey conducted by the Ministry of Industries and Trade in collaboration with the Financial Sector Deepening Trust, of the 3.1 million enterprises, 70% are in the formal sector. Then, it means if you are in the informal, it's not easy for you to access financial services from the banking sector. Therefore, these informal operators have turned to the non-traditional ones, that is the SACCOs, the microfinance, even the families, because about 70% of the money to run the businesses comes from private hands. Now, if one is saying the banks are supposed or are expected to be enablers of the enterprises, then for the case of Tanzania, it's not the case. Because if you are still insisting on traditional, then you are not able to help the informal sectors, operators. So now what these people have done now, they have turned to the small banks, such as Tanzania Postal Bank, CRDB, including Equity Bank, which is basically, which is originated from here. So then there was this issue of trying to help these guys to formalize their businesses so that they can access financial services. But although there are a lot of noise, then this thing has been going for not less than 5 years, but nothing is taking really shape. Even surprisingly, there are banks which were started with the initiative or the capital fund by the government, like, such as Tanzania Women Bank. Surprisingly, the government does not have bank accounts with those banks. They still keep bank accounts with the big commercial banks. So, so what I want to say, that's the challenge to the government of Tanzania.
Thank you.
So I think you got to answer there.
Over there.
Thanks to the panelists. My comments are directed towards the insurance sector within the finance area. And as Tabitha said, it's true that the penetration of insurance, Kenya even being the highest, is still 2.9% against emerging markets that are at 7.4%. The Chair, you said we talk about challenges. The challenge, as I see it, is though there has been a significant increase in the number of underwriters in the region, there are now about 128 of them, there has not been an proportionate increase in the appetite to insure hazards that are prevalent within the communities. And that is not to mean that those hazards are not dealt with. They are dealt with in other informal ways. Merry-go-rounds amongst women's groups, collection forums amongst rural villages. And for me, for that challenge to be resolved, my suggestion would be contemplating the use of challenge funds, perhaps, or sometimes even donor funds have spurred lending in the microfinance sector. Where a certain risk was deemed to be too high, they bridged that gap to get the institutions, even private institutions, to reach the critical mass to see that business as viable. So even with the public efforts as mentioned with NHIF and NSSF, there is room to grow the capacities of private sector through public-private partnership initiatives. And a good example of this is our Constitution of 2010 has a section that enshrines access to medical treatment, including healthcare services, but the Constitution doesn't deal with the financial model of how this is underwritten. So to put it in perspective, there are a lot of hospitals sitting on a big financial risk should they turn away a person if they're not clear of this. And I think if just a little spur to these companies would be easy to reach the groups that are informally carrying risk. My second point is that the distribution methods need to change to embrace ICT. Particularly, Tabitha mentioned, some of these systems don't talk to one another. And there are a lot of homogeneous groups that would gain insurance services. The cooperative movement in our regions is very big because of being an agricultural sector. Those are very large databases. And since bank assurance has already started and proved that it can work, there are other areas where there are homogeneous groups that are easy to price together, provided the ICT platforms are able to reduce the cost of that transaction by being able to talk to one another.
The third challenge, which is related to my first point, is to be able to provide accessible pricing parameters so that to the rural folk, perhaps, or even some urban folk, a vast majority of them who are not insured unless if they're employed or have a mandatory obligation to do it like vehicle insurance, that the pricing is rational to them, for them to make the easier crossover from informal underwriting to formal underwriting. Thanks.
Thank you. In the corner there.
Thank you, Ambassador, to give me this opportunity to express my view. I would like to let all people here understand that ability of various sectors to generate sustainable growth is crucial. East African infrastructure deficit is well-documented challenge. So here we have two types of infrastructure. We are talking about the hard infrastructure to railway and roads, and also soft infrastructure, which is IT and other sectors. Based from previous presentation, based from previous speakers, we all see that the banking industry is a crucial sector in all sectors. And you can see our sector significantly contribute to GDP, almost gives about 1/3 of jobs, and also gives about the employment opportunity in all over the sectors. So my question, my view is try to link between the safety sector and sustainable growth. Talking from my country perspectives, we have Tanzania Development Vision is 2025, and we have picked two scenario attributes, which is a competitive economy and a well-developed society, which is capable to cope with those changes. So from that point of view, I can see the banking industry depend also have a horizontal approach. Banking industry also depend much on IT. You can see we have a huge problem is how to access some balance in our banks, how to download this information from the remote part of the country. So this is a crucial area in the banking industry. We need to work on it very seriously. We need to let all these four countries to analyze the situation and come up with the one solution which will be beneficial for all four countries. So I think in all discussion which have been done by our lovely speakers, all of us know that from this service sector as a play a crucial significant contribution to GDP. So we have to link between the low productivity area to high productivity. That's the crucial area to look at. We can see also in these two corridors, northern corridors and the central corridor, which are key area to look at, because there is a movement of goods, services, and people from the west party to the east part, where we can meet the ports and other goods that are shipped to abroad. So here we can see there is a huge, there is a roadblocks which hinders smooth operation of goods. And service sectors play greater role almost in all sectors. All sectors in our discussion. So there is needed to come up with a strong need to develop capacities, knowledge, and regulatory framework to successfully negotiate and implement the service sectors platform.
Thank you. I'll have the last contribution from Ali, and then we'll have the panelists respond. We will have, as I've said, a second bite on the cherry tomorrow, and we'll revisit these challenges, and then we'll bring our solutions. But we need to move on. Ali?
Yes, just a small one, and thanking the presenters for, a very insightful discussion. But mine, in the regional context, I would wish to hear their reaction with regard to the EAC monetary union, in terms of what opportunities and maybe the potential flexibilities that are within the protocol to be able to maybe promote the financial services, and what has been happening so far since the enactment of the protocol in 2013. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bede?
Thank you very much. The response to, thank you. I will start with a response to Nora. There are two ways to look at what is happening in the mobile money sector and the banking system. You can take an antagonistic approach or cooperative one. Very clearly, the mobile sector does need the bank. You can't handle the volumes of money that they need without having the support of the banking system. And the banking system also needs to the services of mobile money companies in terms of changing the mindsets and attitude of people who don't trust banks, particularly banks where they give you a plastic card, an ATM card, and in the old days you would have a book and they would put your balance there. And so changing the mindsets for the informal sector, for people in the rural economy is important. So they are working more in unison and in cooperation rather than fighting each other, particularly because, as we said, 15% banked in the, it's a big market out there, waiting for whoever can go there first to. Then Mr. Okach raised this about the security of collateral. Yes, there are people who lose out. For the small guys, those who are informal and the microfinance sector, they do get support through the multitude of microfinance institutions. CRDB Bank, for instance, teams up with 500 microfinance circles, basically, and on lending through them to the micro sector. And that's where the high growth, those banks which grow 400%, that's what they are doing. The large companies, medium and large companies, they do get access. There are other instruments like inventories, stocks, etc. The guys who suffer are those who want to graduate from micro into the small group. Those people who need a loan of $20,000, $30,000, they don't fit into the microfinance segment. They are not yet grown the muscle that a bank would want to spend time with you to manage your stocks so that they can lend to you. Those are the ones who pay the heavy price. And it is important to bring them into the market. Otherwise, how do we graduate those small sectors? Well, I guess those are the most important questions which I thought. There was a question about the foreign players there, the large banks, which the good thing about NMB is that it's not really, you have a strategic investor. He owns about 30-35%, and that's not total control. The bank is listed on the Dar es Salaam Stock Exchange, and the government still retains some shares there. So, and it's not South African, it's Rabobank, which is Holland. South Africa is NBC and Standard Chartered, yes. Actually, NBC has been bought out by Barclays. So we don't really have one major bank dominating the industry, and that's the good thing about it. Thank you.
Thank you. George, you want to say something?
Yeah. I thought I would respond to I think that was Ali who asked what has happened since the protocol was promulgated. Maybe to mention that financial services were part of the 7 priority areas that were identified at the time that the protocol was being negotiated as services in which all ESC partner states were required to make commitments. And so all the partner states made commitments on financial services being the way they are listed on the WPC 120, you know, where banking and insurance services were put together. So all partner states made commitments in that regard, except for Uganda. Whereas Uganda liberalized its banking services, it carved out insurance services. So that is a kind of derogation to what was expected, that we Ugandans did not commit to liberalize insurance services in 2010 when the protocol was being concluded, for a number of reasons that were given, including weak institutions, regulatory frameworks were just emerging, now many of which have since been overcome. And so the beauty of the protocol is that it has an inbuilt agenda that would allow for additional commitments before the end of 2015. And the process of making additional commitments has already started. I think it's expected that by December of 2015, in the next 3 months, partner states will be proposing where they intend to make additional commitments. And for Uganda, which sought a derogation on insurance, one of the areas where we are intending to make commitments, additional commitments, is going to be in the area of insurance services. But of course, what has happened, 5 years of implementing the commitments that were made, is that the areas that were opened up, insurance for the ESC4, apart from Uganda, is that implementing those obligations has indicated that the schedules on their own, or the commitments as made in 2010, would not adequately meet the ambitions of the partner states, including the slowest movers in the region. So we are expecting a very interesting process when the additional commitments come to be made. But there's something else that I thought I should respond to. This convergence that has happened between banking and insurance, that we shall, when we get to discuss IT, the convergence between IT-enabled services and financial services, as we see in mobile financial services, convergence has also happened between services other than IT and financial services, as has been demonstrated for insurance and banking. And my sister is worried whether we are not going to suffer the 2008 collapse that happened in the West, and that ours is going to happen now, 7 years since 2008. Now, I want to imagine that this convergence, what is called regulatory cooperation, because you've got two different services that seem to emerge. When you have a regulator of insurance services working closely with the regulator of banking services, you may be able to arrest those insurance players who are trying to escape very strict regulation in insurance by pretending to be a banking operator. So when the two regulators speak to each other, the kind of meltdown that caused the collapse of Goldman Sachs may not happen in the region, but only if the regulators are strictly cooperating. If they don't, that is likely to happen. Because what has happened for mobile money, the fact that we have not yet had a collapse, although we had a very big fraud in Uganda in the biggest mobile money player about 2 years ago, MTN, is that the regulator for telecoms and the financial services, the central bank, are watching these guys strictly because they're holding trillions of shillings. You can't allow a gray area to exist where a lot of money is being held, and especially money from the most vulnerable of your population. People who have been cheated by banks who think that finally we have an umbrella under which we shall operate. So I think that regulatory collaboration, regulating convergence as it's emerging, including in areas other than ITs and financial services.
Thank you. Tabitha, a few comments?
Yes. I'll make one very crucial comment, which I think we have overlooked. That it was said that in Kenya we have almost all the land registered, but I thought back of what we said at the very beginning of inclusive growth and sustainable development, and I remembered that in Kenya, although land is registered, only 5% of that land belongs to women. So it's very important to remember that. Only 5% of the title deeds belong to women, and it therefore means that if they have to use the banking services, they are actually locked out because they lack collateral. And it therefore means that they cannot participate in their businesses will remain small because they'll have to borrow from the Shylocks, they'll have to borrow from SMEs, the small banks, and of course, if they want to borrow big money, they cannot get that. And that is why we usually find that most women's businesses actually remain small, and we call the missing middle, and that actually belongs, it's a gender issue, and we need to remember that. And then there was the issue of I mean, banks also teaming up as insurance companies. My own opinion is that it's actually a very dangerous trend because it tends towards allowing monopolistic tendencies, because this is a bank that is getting money from the people. It's also insuring them what would happen if there was a financial meltdown. That's a very, very dangerous thing to do. And apart from that, the monopolistic tendency, I was just thinking of, Australia, where we have two monopolies, Woolworths and Coles. They actually own the petrol station, they own the insurance companies, such that if those two companies had to go under, if they had to collapse, the whole economy would collapse. So my own little 5 cents of opinion is that that's a very dangerous trend to go to. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tabitha. Your statistics are always very impressive to follow. Colleagues, we'll move to the next sector, which is ICT services in East Africa. I'll invite Tabitha to make her opening remarks and then invite the other panelists.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'll just open the debate and then the rest will come from the floor and talk about the Kenya situation. And I think there's somebody else who's also got a lot of statistics on Kenya. And in Kenya, the communication sector is a major employer. It employs more than 1 million people, and especially more than 1 million people in 2014. And regulation is by many state corporations. You have the Communication Authority of Kenya, we have the Kenya Broadcasting Corporation, and so on and so forth. And the communication sector is both government-owned and private. Rather, we have public players, that's the government, and we also have the private sector. In the public sector, we have the postal services. We also have Orange Telecom. And the private players, we have Safaricom, that is mainly the mobile telephony. We have Safaricom, we have Airtel, we have You. And then Safaricom, usually, we have been saying that it's the dominant player. It has got monopolistic tendency. It is the one that actually started M-Pesa and has actually locked more than 80% of the people in Safaricom, so that if you had to transfer money to another telephone services provider, then the transaction cost is actually very, very high. Now, the ICT indicators in Kenya show that in terms of fixed telephone lines per 100 inhabitants, these ones have actually been dropping drastically. Mobile cellular telephone subscriptions, these ones have actually been rising from 68.2% in 2011 to 78.3% in 2014, that's last year. In terms of wireless internet, this one has risen from 15.4% in 2011 to 38.1%. Internet subscribers from 15 to 38.3. Bits per second, that's per capita, they have also risen from a low of 855.7 to 12,157.9. Broadband subscription, although I said when I was talking about financial services, this is a problem, we are also saying it has actually been rising, but not to the levels that would be expected. And mobile telephone capacity has also been rising. In total, Kenya is actually ranked very well in terms of competitiveness, so that the World Economic Forum for 2015 shows that Kenya was ranked number 94 out of 143 in terms of overall network readiness index. It shows that Kenya is actually trying. But even with that, there are many, many challenges that Kenya faces. One is lack of infrastructure in rural areas, because most of this is in urban areas, so that you'll hear people saying that they actually had to climb a tree for them to make a telephone call. You can imagine trying to climb a tree and you're making a telephone call. What happens to old women like me? I wouldn't be able to climb a tree. And it's also, especially when we are talking about ICT that is supposed to be used for giving service infrastructure, banking, where we need ICT, in government to offer what you call e-government. It's actually very, very, very expensive, especially in the private sector, for new entrants to come up with the infrastructure for ICT. And I've also said, if you look at the data, that broadband subscription is only 9.7, and it therefore means that there is limited access to broadband and connectivity. Now, if I was to move from Kenya to Uganda using my Safaricom line or my Airtel line, now the roaming charges are so high so that if you put 10,000 Kenya shillings, that will take you maybe 2 days. If you had to do business, that will take you 2 days because of the roaming charges. Now, M-Pesa charges are also very high if you had to transfer money from one service provider to the other one. And therefore, we are seeing there is need for capacity building, especially in terms of regulation. There's a need for capacity building in terms of development of local content, especially when it comes to communication and information services. Thank you very much, Ambassador.
Thank you very much. I would ask Diane to just supplement Tabitha's presentation.
Okay. Yeah. My part was actually more of East Africa, the whole of it,
Yes,
and
yes.
basically ICT and building up the case for ICT in East Africa. First of all, when we talk about ICT, we're talking about all information technology, communication, IT-enabled services, and this is where earlier in the morning we were talking about manufacturing and other non-service products. Do they need services? And definitely yes, that's why we have IT-enabled services, and then there is the business process outsourcing. And these are very common across most of the countries in East Africa. When we look at where ICT comes in, there is software development, data processing, and database services, business ICT services. In almost every office in Eastern Africa will need ICT services. Some have contact centers. There is HR, management, payroll, accounting. Tabitha mentioned media. There is engineering design or product design. There is telemarketing, internet services and content, social media, website development, airline reservations, financial processing, logistics. ICT as well comes in there. Inventory, procurement, transcription, which in Eastern Africa is mostly used for BPO services, business process outsourcing services, mostly export services to the Western world. Why do we need ICT? The first presentation today, we talked about sustainable development goals, which we as East Africa need to address. And ICT is one of the strongest services that will help us address this. If we just look at some of the ones that it addresses: decent work and economic growth, industry innovation and infrastructure, quality education, gender equality, peace, justice, and strong institutions. If we're going to have strong institutions, we need ICT to manage the processes and to check regulation across our institutions. Sustainable cities and communities, we're talking about smart cities as the future. So if our cities are going to be smart, we have to integrate with ICT services and ICT services and infrastructure for that. Then responsible consumption and production, especially in production, we need ICT there as well. So ICT is a way of life. We can't run away from it. And we therefore need to put a lot of effort in growing it in Eastern Africa. Some of the benefits that we directly see: job creation, decent work for onshore work, that's companies within our countries, companies across borders, and even international companies in the Western world. We're able to borrow from India and offer offshoring. Rwanda, Kenya, and Uganda are doing a lot of that. Tanzania, I think it's still very little. ICT also offers improved efficiencies across industries, helps you to save time and money. You get improved customer service in government and private sector, and security of data and records in organizations. Where are we at in Eastern Africa? There is a lot of, if we look at Kenya, there's a lot of growth led, especially by the private sector in telecommunication and in banking. That's where we see ICT usage being strongest. In Rwanda and in Uganda, we see the government being very much behind ICT, trying to encourage the private sector, trying to encourage government institutions to pick up ICT, and also trying to encourage enterprise for ICT provision. Then there's still massive potential. We haven't scratched the surface, and we're still far from the rest of the developed world, and that's in government and in all other sectors of the private sector. Some of the recent successes in ICT in Eastern Africa, internet connectivity, fiber optic cable is probably 6-7 years old, but that is the one that is bringing all this growth that we mentioned. You know, early in the morning we're being given statistics of the ICT growth in the various countries, and that has mostly come since the internet connectivity was improved. There's growth in mobility, huge numbers. Africa is quite a story when it comes to usage of mobile phones. So there's access of phones across all ages and across, you know, rural and urban areas. There's also access to the internet via the mobile phone. In Africa, I think we're the ones who use mobile phone mostly for accessing the internet, and therefore accessing internet services as well. There are many innovation stories in Africa. M-Pesa is the biggest one, starting from Kenya, but also growing in the rest of Eastern Africa, mobile money transfer. Banking services as well. I mean, it's just such a pleasure for anyone who was banking in the 90s and in the 80s. It's a pleasure to just see how improved banking services are and what banks won't do for you. And that's because they have access to your data thanks to ICT. They have access to connectivity thanks to ICT. And then there are many other payment solutions that are coming up. If you want to pay for your television services, for electricity, for water, ICT is a big help. Then there are many graduates that are coming up in Eastern Africa. Young people are interested in studying ICT. And because of this, when they come out of school and they're not employable, they are innovating in ICT. One of the most joyful places to have been in was Kenya during the GES, and there was also an innovation symposium earlier in the year, around June, July. And some of the innovations included a couple of guys, young guys in their early 20s, and they have discovered the way of, you know, giving motorcycles indicators. So they wear a jacket and they indicate when they're turning left, turning right, you know, in trying to reduce the accidents that we were talking about earlier. And that's just one of them. There were quite a number of innovations there. Then, of course, service development. I mean, these graduates who studied ICT are also coming up with ICT solutions to develop service further. Then there's lots of ICT incubation hubs, more of them in Kenya, but also Rwanda and Uganda catching up. iLab, iHub, NILab, most of them, okay, some of them associated to universities. In Uganda, there's National Software Incubation Center. So those are some of the recent successes to just show, I think, we're getting somewhere in ICT, but we're not yet there. Many challenges still remain. There's still a large population that has to mind shift to ICT in everyday life, everyday business, everyday living. And you go to businesses where people have an ICT department at a corner somewhere. And, you know, if you have an ICT question, go to ICT. But what we have to realize is that ICT is business. You cannot separate, let's say, banking, which is much more obvious. You cannot say that's the ICT department for banking and this is banking. But we still have too many organizations, mostly government, but also, you know, manufacturing or insurance still. You'll still have an ICT department where you're told to go and address ICT issues there. But we have to realize ICT is business in everything that we do. We have to integrate ICT in our business solutions to move forward. We still need broader and reliable internet connectivity, mostly in the rural areas, but even in the cities, it still needs to reach the last mile. It still needs to be consistent, less cutouts. We need to avail budgets in business and also in government. And this is part of mind shift. People are willing to buy a 5 million car, but they're not willing to invest into a 5 million shilling ICT system to help the company. So we have to change our thinking and try and see where we'll get value in our work. They're young entrepreneurs. They need support. They need financial support. They need business support to help them build up their innovation and to help their innovations become more marketable. And these young entrepreneurs also need IP, IP, intellectual property protection. Many of them have wonderful ideas. How do we make sure that they benefit from these? We need affordable ICT solutions. I think we're still very much dependent on the West, on solutions from the West. So we still use ERP systems. We think SAP is the best. We still use a lot of Oracle or of IBM, but a lot of these solutions are very expensive for most enterprises. So we need more homegrown solutions across the whole of East Africa for us to be able to afford them more and also to bring up our young people as well. We need supporting regulation. Data protection laws are not adequate. People are still not comfortable enough with what organizations do with their data, and does the law protect them adequately when they give out their data? We also need to address the legal framework to make it more modern so that ICT is seen as a way, as a normal way of business. For example, if I send you an email today, and commit my organization, can I use that as evidence in court? In most of the East African countries, not yet, and we need to deal with some of those challenges. Some of the possible interventions that we can think of: capacity development, ICT training to start from school, from primary level education up to university. All professional training should include ICT. So if you're studying accounting, you should be able to come up from there, being able to use several accounting packages. If you're an engineer or a draftsman, you should come out from university knowing how to use computer-aided design. Then also, I think a lot more training in the workplace. If we look at governments, I don't know if any of you have visited your local government, let alone the national government. If you go to the rural areas, there are hardly any computers, and the people there are hardly able to use them if you provided them. So we need training at the lower levels of the workplace. As a region, we need to embrace ICT, especially in the public sector, that all government services should be provided in a more efficient way through use of ICT. In that way, we need to digitize government services and digitize government data a lot more. It's ongoing, but not enough. Private sector must follow. We need to support innovators and ICT businesses. We need to implement regulation and enforce intellectual property laws. We also need more internet connectivity, higher bandwidth, so that we are able to provide services faster and more reliably. And we need this internet connectivity at a lower cost. It's not affordable by everybody right now.
Thank you for that contribution. I'll give George opportunity to address ICT-enabled services.
Yes, thank you very much. For a moment, I thought I should just pass on my notes to Diane, because she sounds that the authority in the area that I wanted to contribute. But, listening to what Diane had to say, and then Tabitha, you then realize that the case that I'm making to have a sector annex on IT-enabled services, everything that Diane has mentioned does not feature anywhere in the Common Market Protocol. Because you know that the protocol was built on the architecture of the end of the Uruguay round, where these services, all these things, including mobile phones, did not exist at that time. So having adopted the architecture of the end of the Uruguay round of the GATS, to be the foundation on which the protocol was built. All these things that young people do appreciate, now I understand even us who are older do also appreciate, those things are all outside the common market protocol. Now, because we all ESC partner states made commitments, liberalization commitments, and they are contained in our schedules, and we think there is nothing else to do with regard to computer-related services and telecom services, it means that, that for this sector, the protocol and all the other integration documents that we have are going to basically be irrelevant. But it's very important for us to understand that if there was no reference paper on basic telecommunications in 1994 for Kenya, Uganda, and other countries that signed onto it, it's very unlikely that Diane would be talking about the things she has just been talking about. I mean, the forerunner to the sectoral annexes we are talking about now was that reference paper at the WTO in 1994 that was open to a few countries to sign on. Now that this thing has become so ubiquitous, that you simply can't run away from IT-enabled services, this lady has just made my case very, very easy. We need to have a document that can be appended as part of the Common Market Protocol and our other documents, where people like Diana and her colleagues can sit and say, what are those things that we would wish to see? That M-Pesa, that in this country, 80% of mobile financial services are on one platform, and you'll be penalized if you are tempted to move off M-Pesa, off Safaricom, to go to another network. If you do, you are going to pay highly for it. So in terms of portability within this jurisdiction, it's limited to that extent. Now, if you are Ugandan, it's even worse. In Uganda, you cannot, if you receive money on Airtel Money, you cannot walk into an MTN mobile money booth and ask for money unless you have got another line. So there is hardly any portability in our case. Now, that is for mobile money services. Then how about data? I came to this country loaded with data on my phone, but I cannot use data when I walk out of this hotel. Now, of course, I've got access to Wi-Fi, but data there is no portability for data. And yet the telcos will tell you that over the last 3 years, the place to make money is off data. Data probably is what would be bandwidth in terms of the things that Diana has been talking about. Now, these are some of the elements that would be captured in a sectoral annex that comprehensively covers a sector. I mean, the provisions that we now have in our documents are basically obsolete. So that if this debate must be part of this picture, we need to find an instrument that accommodates it. And I'm thinking that just like everybody seems to have bought into the idea of a sectoral annex that is driven by both regulators and sector players, we need something similar for IT-enabled services. Now, there is no better place to drive this arrangement than Kenya, where M-Pesa was born. I don't know how many of you know that M-Pesa right now is bigger than Western Union in terms of the money that it holds and in terms of the money that is made off the platform. So if that mobile money thing is bigger than Western Union, is there a better champion for this sectoral annex than Kenya? Mr. Chairman, I beg to submit.
Thank you. Bede?
Thank you very much. The case has come out very strongly. Even in Tanzania, we have started off. We invested very bigly in infrastructure. One of them, during the earlier days, very sad, when we didn't have a strong regulator. And you will go around the countryside and you will come upon every hill you come up against in a remote area, you would find 3 towers clustered close together within 3 meters of each other. Each of the big players established a parallel infrastructure network. Now it's no longer the story, but that which has been constructed is still in place. It was a lot of wastage of resources. They are bringing out the commonalities now. But the result, the impact has been good. We have total mobile subscriber at 32 million. Of course, there are many people who have 2 or 3 lines, and internet about 3 million. And the percentage of GDP is close to 4% now. Tele density about 69%. And the impact you can see on mobile money, that it grew, the industry grew by 300% in 2012 alone. And so its role as an enabler has come out. As my colleague mentioned earlier, we have those 22,000 kilometers of fiber optic with nodes almost reaching out to almost more than 120 districts. But investment in the last mile is yet to come about. And the upside is that there is potential for using this infrastructure and the high level of awareness in doing what we were talking of earlier, leapfrogging the process in delivery of government businesses. It's a very powerful instrument when you are starting from scratch, as we are. Well, basically, all our services are paper-based, so it's a matter of saying we are doing now the national identification card, and that should centralize the system, a common database across the economy. And of course, the private sector also has to take it up in terms of the business-to-business marketing, addressing the marketing challenge, whether you are talking of information, market information, or publicizing yourself worldwide. The power is extremely, the instruments are there, and the challenge, as somebody mentioned, is for us in Tanzania, again, training. We are looking for addressing the skills challenge in starting with 6 sectors, and ICT is one of them. And the training is a big challenge because you are talking not only people in the formal sector, but even the general population. And sensitizing the young men and women coming out of the universities to look for the business opportunities that are made possible, are opening up because of this one. It's true. I haven't heard anybody talking of BPO in Tanzania, and sometimes I ask myself what is happening. But then, of course, we have our problem with English. It's not a very good language. So that is a constraint. And we have this debate, or should we go Swahili or English or Swahili or English or Swahili? And sometimes we remind them that we are living in a world where it's not a matter of either or. It's a matter of being multilingual in a global economy. And sometimes we look at the Chinese, we have so many of them in Tanzania, and they speak Swahili. In the next room, you wouldn't know that, you would think it's a Tanzanian. And those are the challenges that we face, the realization that the biggest enabler in the world is language, talking. And that's a challenge we have to address first. And that will give us, if we resolve that one, it will give us the confidence to cross the other Rubicons, so to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Bede. I will go around the table, beginning from my right here. Please proceed.
ICT is both an industry in its own right and an enabler. An industry in that you can produce goods for export. If you take actually the case of South Korea, actually out of 5 of its major exports, 3 are from ICT. And ICT contributes a third of actually South Korean export. So that means investing in the ICT sector. Actually, we can even actually increase on diversify our export based on actually low volume, high value aspect. And when we also look at employment creation, and you take also the same case of South Korea, every year South Korea registers the highest number of intellectual property rights from ICT. Of course, that means money and jobs, just literally translated. Then, what we also need to appreciate is ICT is a new animal on the globe that most of us don't know what it can do for us. like she was saying, the business community involving it and whatever. Take an example of when you look at the robot being used to do the work. How does it know that at certain stage should do, it should take action, either hold or release? There must be some, actually ICT are involved in the whole thing. Even the vehicle we drive, if you are driving an automatic vehicle, how does it know that now it is time to change gear or whatever? So that is ICT that is involved there. I'll give you an example of Singapore. We talk of actually the port of Singapore as the most efficient port. But I don't know whether we are aware that actually that Singapore port has the minimum actually human beings operating the port. All the operation are computerized, so they are run on ICT. Malaysia tried to copy the actually the same, built the infrastructure, but they didn't have the software. So actually they failed actually to match the efficiency of Singapore. You look at issues we are talking of actually ICT health, we are talking of telemedicine, we are talking of actually e-library, so all that makes actually ICT an enabler. So that means in every sector, in every office, or in every business, like actually what Warusim is saying, most people now actually carry their office on their smartphones. Everything, and he loses his smartphone, he has lost everything. But actually, most of us, we are still used in the born before computer business, where actually must actually do things the way we found them doing. But I think we need to have that deliberate policy as governments to make the public aware of what ICT can do for them, because not everybody knows what the benefits are there in ICT. And the challenge we have is, for example, like actually when Warusim was talking about distribution, I think now there is this facility for cargo tracking. You just load your cargo with some ICT chip, and you are sure that will arrive. If anybody tampers, at least you will be monitoring it. Cars have been recovered either from South Sudan or even Democratic Republic of Congo, just with the help of ICT. So the challenge, however, is that, one, we need that ICT infrastructure, as she said. But if we can invest in the infrastructure, unlike other industries where you need actually sophisticated lab, for an ICT researcher, all he needs is internet and a desk and possibly a computer somewhere in the corner of the office, and then he will be able actually to do his research on software or hardware. And then the other challenge is it takes more than one discipline, because I may be an agriculturist or an economist or whatever, or even a medical practitioner. But unless actually I sit down with somebody in the ICT, that is actually a programmer, system analyst, and then me to tell him my problem, it is very difficult actually to come up with a solution. So you need to work as a team. And I think building on some of the experience we have had, I don't know whether Warusimbi, you have heard about the FNA, the Senga in Kampala, where actually one of the applications actually uses ICT software to test for malaria parasites in the blood without pricking you. So I think that makes actually life for the medical practitioner easier, and even me a patient, because if I don't have, every time I go to the lab to have my blood, my hand, finger pricked, It makes actually the health service more user-friendly. Then there is also, I think the Senga is supposed actually to monitor the fetus growth in the mother's womb using actually just a simple phone. So with actually more facilitation and financing of the IC sector, I think we have the potential to leapfrog the transformation and sustain, because as somebody said, I think it must be one of, although when it comes actually to e-waste disposals, then we also need to be cautious of its impact on the environment. But for its development, I think this is the way to go. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to throw a challenge to the room. And the challenge is that I want you to respond by saying the challenge in ICT from your experience is one, and list your challenges. The lady over there.
I think I will respond exactly the way the chair has directed, and I think the challenge that he has that we are supposed to address has mostly been brought by the involvement of the cities. You know, from the military cities, now we're in the industrialized cities, and there's a lot of challenges that have come with the industrialized cities, and I think mostly because we are talking about socio-economic sustainability, you know, how we'll sustain ourselves and also the economy. So I think there's a lot of issues that have come with the industrialization, mostly from the climate change, and so the amount of carbon emissions that we are currently having, I think the global statistics by now stands to around 400 million what about per pipe. So something has to be done to address the technology in a way of, because the technology is not the means, it's not the end, it's just a means. So having a technology or delivering services through technology in a smart way, which is green, I think it's one area that is a challenge and needs to be addressed by the ICT sector. The other challenge, then now I'll come down to my country, which is Kenya. What we are having, the biggest challenge we're having in Kenya as far as ICT is concerned, is the approaches and the strategies that we are adopting, you know, to develop our own ICT strategy. One that we see is that there's lack of integration in a way that whatever we are doing in various projects or flagship projects are not integrated. So, and they don't address the various services. I've seen, for example, in the current ICT master plan, which I've participated in, and I'm even through the ITC, I've been part of the caucus members, is that it's really relying mostly, or it's more towards the infrastructure. But I don't know if there's any Kenyan within the audience that knows and is from a different sector, like how well is the ICT master plan addressing agriculture, tourism, you know, health, and all those other service providers. The second thing is the skill gap, and which my government has tried as much as possible, our government, sorry, has tried as much as possible to address. We now have the digital, the presidential digital program, which seeks to bridge the gap between the public sector and the private sector, and they have included the private sector in this discussion, but it's still a challenge. There's a big challenge on the level of skill that is there on different sectors. And then the other issue is the issue of mitigating the risk that comes about when you adopt ICT as a service provider. So I think there are cybersecurity is an issue, and I think when you're talking about the regional integration, especially at the East Africa community, I think cybersecurity is an issue that has come up, but I don't know how far we've gone into closing and having a working framework on that, because we are very quick to embrace this technology and to convert ourselves into digital citizens, but we really don't really understand that this is another world that we are going to, and we are totally blind from it. I think that the last issue is the issue of regulation. I think ICT is very dynamic. things change very fast. I've seen in my own country, it took us 2 years to license the second mobile money operator. So with that, I can believe everyone will be playing catch up, because you know, it's an industry where you actually rely on subscriber, and if you already give somebody 2 years of what we call later, it will be very fast. It will be very hard for you to create that level playing field for everyone. So I think the dynamism of the industry, you know, it comes to play when it comes to regulation. So decisions have to be made fast, and the regulator has to be robust and capable of moving as fast. So those are the key challenges for my.
Thank you. The next speaker. Okay, over there.
Can I just make a general comment and a general observation of what I see the challenge in terms of not only the ITC sector, but even the other sectors presented. Something that's not coming out very clearly, and something that I think always ends up being the result. There's a lot of posturing, you know, countries saying we can do this, we can't do this. I think the real issues should be, one, a clear analysis of the endowments and abilities. If there's a clear analysis of the endowments and abilities, then the challenge of how do we go forward. I think one thing that countries, especially in the Eastern and Southern African region, need to realize is that you can't be good at everything. And the case study just illustrates that you have got some you could have some weaknesses in your value chain. It doesn't mean that you have to address them yourself. It might require that you need to import those services from another country. And this is what's not coming out very strongly in our discussion. I hear we're going to work on it because we're weak. Maybe it's going to cost you 100 million in that particular sector, and in another sector it's only going to cost you 10 million. So I think the issue of should I move in this sector needs to come out very clearly. And something that I don't know which of our colleagues said here, the developments of ICT, for example, in the health sector, that in a region like Africa where the presence of a health practitioner everywhere is a challenge, so ICT is meeting that gap. So maybe I'm going to spend $5 million to improve access to health, as opposed to $50 million in trying to bring more doctors and nurses closer. So, you know, that discussion, those challenges are not coming out clear, and I think it would be very unfortunate if tomorrow we haven't highlighted those gaps by tomorrow. So as we continue to debate, can we say we can do this? Even for the countries that are good, you can't be good at everything. You know, that's something that needs to really come out here, and it's not coming out very strongly.
Thank you. The lady next to you.
I'm going to briefly state my issue, for mainly to do with adoption of the services, because when you look at how many startups